Chapter 1230. It was as if the Empyrean fairy and Yan Qingyi had been paralyzed. They stared at each other in silence. At this moment, she was no longer Yan Qingyi, but rather the Emperor of Heaven. Yao, have you been well these past few years? The Emperor of Heaven asked. Yao. This name caused everyone's hearts to tremble. Who had the qualifications to call the Empyrean fairy this way? Even if Tang Zheng had a close relationship with her, he definitely wouldn't call her that. Father! The Empyrean fairy emotionally shouted, two streams of hot tears flowing from her eyes. Yao! The Emperor of Heaven also became emotional. The two threw themselves together and tightly hugged each other. The Emperor of Heaven's eyes also flashed with tears. What was going on? How did Yan Qingyi become the Empyrean fairy's father? Everyone else's jaws dropped to the ground. Their brains lost the ability to think as they stared blankly at this scene. The Empyrean fairy laid in the Emperor of Heaven's embrace. She raised her head and asked with tears in her eyes, Father, Yao missed you so much. The Emperor of Heaven gently stroked her hair and kindly said, Father also missed you. It's been a few years, but Father has finally seen you again. Father, when I first woke up, why didn't you come out to see me? That way we could have met several thousand years ago. Do you know how much Yao missed you these past few years? The Empyrean fairy returned to her daughter's appearance. She was as cute as a little girl. Father is only a strand of soul. I slept for several thousand years, and was awakened by this battle. Then, I possessed this little girl's body to help you repel the enemy. The Emperor of Heaven said. Everyone suddenly understood. No wonder Yan Qingyi suddenly became so powerful. It was because she was possessed by the Emperor of Heaven's soul. This little girl's talent is extremely high. If I hadn't met her, I wouldn't have been able to help you. Is that so? The Empyrean fairy had heard about Yan Qingyi from Tang Zheng and knew a thing or two about her. She said, she knows the art of prophecy. Moreover, according to her, there was something that led her here this time. That's why she decided to travel with us even though she's powerless. Prophecy? She's so young, yet she knows prophecy? The Emperor of Heaven was surprised. The Empyrean fairy was well aware of how bizarre and miraculous this was. She said in agreement. Yes, she seemed to have comprehended the great Tao of heaven and earth, and then learned the art of prophecy. Is that so? So that's how it is. The Emperor of Heaven seemed to be deep in thought. The Empyrean fairy didn't see the contemplative look in her father's eyes. Instead, she asked excitedly, Father, since your soul is still here, then you can be reborn. Of course. The Empyrean fairy was wild with joy. She almost jumped up and hugged Yan Qingyi tightly. She didn't want to let go. That. Yan Luyan was intimidated by the Emperor of Heaven's imposing manner. He didn't even dare to breathe loudly. However, when he heard this, he couldn't help but muster up his courage. He asked in a trembling voice, Excuse me, if you possess my aunt's body, then what will happen to her? Is she going to die? Yan Qingyi had a very special position in the Yan family. She was the apple of the Yan family's eye. Although she didn't know martial arts, she had won the respect of many people. Yan Luyan was one of them. At this moment he had to stand up and speak up for Yan Qingyi. As soon as he said this, everyone turned their heads and stared at Yan Luyan. Although Yan Luyan was used to being stared at by so many people, this time was different. His heart was in turmoil and he was anxious. How could she die? The Emperor of Heaven turned his head and stared at him. Yan Luyan was delighted and asked, Then when can she come back? What he meant was, when can you leave Yan Qingyi's body? Before the Emperor of Heaven could answer, the Empyrean fairy couldn't help but say loudly, Yan Luyan, what do you mean by that? Are you afraid that my father will take over her body? The Empyrean fairy's protective nature was revealed. Yan Luyan resentfully said, Of course not. The Emperor of Heaven waved his hand and said, Young man, don't worry. How could I take over her body? I am the dignified Emperor of Heaven. How could I be such a person who would lower myself? Yan Luyan's heart that was hanging in the air finally returned to his stomach. He revealed a relieved smile and said, With your words, I'm relieved. On the way to the gate of heaven, they already knew that the Empyrean fairy was the daughter of the Emperor of Heaven. Her status was noble, so the identity of the soul that possessed Yan Qingyi's body was naturally obvious. It's your family's fortune to have her, the heavenly emperor said mysteriously. Fortunate to have a family? Yan Luyin was confused, not knowing what he meant. The emperor of heaven deliberately gave a mysterious smile and said, "You will know in the future." The Empyrean fairy's heart was filled with suspicions. She also wanted to ask, but seeing her father's expression, she suppressed her curiosity. "What did you come to the gate of heaven for this time?" The emperor of heaven let go of the Empyrean fairy and curiously asked, "To save someone." The Empyrean fairy's gaze looked towards the direction of Tang Zheng's sacred armor shield. The emperor of heaven suspiciously turned his head, and also saw the sacred armor shield. He asked, "Who is inside?" "A person with the 9-yang saint body. A celestial." The emperor of heaven revealed an expression of shock. It was enough to shock him. It could be seen just how extraordinary a celestial's identity was. The Empyrean fairy nodded. "Yes, this person is your daughter's companion. A celestial has the 9-yang saint body, so he really does need the pure yin energy in the sky bed." The emperor of heaven suddenly said, "No, it's not to save him, but to save someone else. That person's pure yin energy has been sucked dry, so he needs the pure yin energy in the sky bed to help her recover." The Empyrean fairy explained. The emperor of heaven fell into deep thought. His eyes lit up as he hit the nail on the head and said, "If he wants to absorb the pure yin energy in the sky bed, then there must be an expert guiding him." The Empyrean fairy had always been curious as to what method Tang Zheng used to guide the pure yin energy into Yi Dingdong's body. Hearing the emperor of heaven say this, she quickly asked, "Father, why do you say this? Normal people would not know about this method. This is a method passed down from ancient times. Even you do not know about it." The emperor of heaven's expression became thought-provoking. This was because he knew that only by using the power of yin and yang would he be able to freely circulate the pure yin energy and absorb it into his body. Originally, he did not choose this method to save his daughter, because he would not allow a man to sully his daughter. The others were also very curious about the specific method to save the person. They all stared at him like curious babies. The emperor of heaven looked at the others and mysteriously said, "As long as it can save the person, it's fine. There's no need to ask about the specific method." The emperor of heaven was clearly evading the question, and no one could ask. After all, the emperor of heaven's status was illustrious. He was not a normal person. The Empyrean fairy also did not delve into it. Instead, she remembered a question from before and asked, "Father, you said that the sky chess is not ordinary. Could it be related to you letting them go in the end?" The others could not see it, but the Empyrean fairy was very clear about the emperor of heaven's strength. In the end, Ji Wuxiang and the masked man were both swept away by the whirlwind. It seemed like they had failed, but in reality, they did not die. The emperor of heaven must have done this for some reason. The emperor of heaven looked at his daughter with gratification. His daughter knew him best. She had guessed correctly. After all, the emperor of heaven was only a wisp of his soul. He was not at his peak, so his strength was limited. If he wanted to get rid of Ji Wuxiang, he would have to completely surpass the sky chess. However, the emperor of heaven realized that it was impossible. The strength of the sky chess was beyond the emperor of heaven's imagination. If he was at his peak, it would naturally not be a problem. However, for the current him, it was impossible for him to achieve this. However, he could not easily let go of those who tried to encroach on the Elysium. Therefore, after teaching Ji Wuxiang and the masked man a harsh lesson in his best condition, he purposely showed that he did not care about the sky chess at all. Compared to physical attacks, this would create more pressure and psychological trauma for Ji Wuxiang. The Emperor of Heaven had lived for so many years. How intelligent and insightful was he? With a single glance, he could see the position of the sky chess in Ji Wuxiang's heart. He purposely said, "It's just SOSO," in order to completely destroy his will. Currently, the effect was not bad. If Ji Wuxiang could not walk out of the shadow, then he would not be able to recover from the setback and become an insignificant person. He could not even be called an enemy. If Ji Wuxiang walked out of the shadow, then he would definitely become even stronger. His understanding of the sky chess would also reach a higher level. He would become a truly powerful enemy, or even a threat. The Emperor of Heaven understood this at that time, but he still acted without hesitation. His decisiveness was evident from this. Yes, the sky chess is extraordinary. If that person's understanding of the sky chess reaches a higher level, then he will definitely become a huge threat. Therefore, I purposely said those words to destroy his will. The Emperor of Heaven explained concisely. Hearing this, the Empyrean fairy's heart trembled. She had still underestimated Ji Wuxiang. Her father had actually said that he had the chance to become a huge threat. This was coming from the Emperor of Heaven. She understood very well what these words meant. She smacked her lips, not knowing what to say. When the others heard the Emperor of Heaven praise the sky chess and Ji Wuxiang so highly, they were secretly somewhat indignant, but they were also extremely shocked. This person is a peerless genius who can create the sky chess. Although I have only seen the surface of the sky chess, I have already understood its subtleties. The Emperor of Heaven had a unique insight. He had only fought with Ji Wuxiang for a very short period of time, but he had already discovered many things. The Empyrean fairy was silent for a long time. After a moment of silence, she said, "Then I hope he will be unable to recover from this setback." "I hope so." At this moment, Ji Wuxiang was standing outside the gate of heaven. He was in a daze, as if his will had been taken away. His eyes were dim and he muttered, "That's all, that's all." These 4 words seemed to have a magical power that reverberated in his mind. It was impossible to get rid of them. It was also like a curse that was fiercely branded into his brain. He couldn't care less about his severe injuries. He stared blankly at the gate of heaven. The gate of heaven was already closed, so he couldn't see the situation inside. However, he could foresee that with that mysterious Yan Qingyi, no one could pry into the secrets of the gate of heaven. Moreover, Ji Wuxiang couldn't care about the secrets of the gate of heaven. He put all his thoughts on the sky chess. The more he thought, the more his head hurt. He couldn't help but hold his head and roll on the ground, crying out in pain. There weren't many masked men left. Seeing this scene, they quickly helped him up and ran away in panic. Chapter 1231. In Heaven's Gate, everyone was thinking about what had happened. They were shocked and had mixed feelings. Empyrean Fairy had always remembered the rumors about Heaven's Gate. In addition, Ji Wuxiang had chased after them from far away. She couldn't help but ask curiously, "Father, there are rumors that Heaven's Gate contains the secret of the Fu clan. Once you obtain this secret, you can become the new Emperor of Heaven. Is it true?" Emperor of Heaven looked kindly at Empyrean Fairy. After thinking for a while, he asked, "Do you know the origin of our Fu clan?" "Of course I do." Empyrean Fairy nodded without hesitation. "We are the descendants of Fuxi's ancestors." Yes, Fuxi is the first Emperor of Heaven since ancient times. After that, many Emperor of Heaven appeared in our Fu clan. The Emperor of Heaven is not only a symbol of strength, but also because we are able to communicate with the heavens. That is why we can be called the Emperor of Heaven. Emperor of Heaven said without stopping. Empyrean Fairy nodded. This was the history she knew. She didn't know why her father wanted to bring it up again. This was an eye-opener for the others. Originally, they thought that the title of Celestial Emperor was just a title for a powerful cultivator. They didn't expect that there would be so many conditions. Communicating with the heavens and hearing from the heavens was too high and too mysterious. No one doubted this point because it came from Emperor of Heaven's mouth. Only our Fu clan can become the Emperor of Heaven. This made many people jealous. Many people researched and tried to find out the secret. They really put in a lot of effort. Empyrean Fairy frowned and interrupted. "Father, is there really a secret?" "What do you think?" Empyrean Fairy thought back to how certain the others were. She was skeptical and asked, "Is there really a secret?" "Ha ha ha, you have indeed grown up. You know how to think. You are much stronger than before." The Emperor of Heaven was perceptive and knew very well that the Fu Yao back then wasn't that formidable. She was proud to the bone and had never experienced wind and rain. She was a flower that grew up in a greenhouse. Now that they were reunited after such a long time, the Empyrean Fairy gave the Emperor of Heaven a very different feeling. It was as if she was a completely different person, but a much better person. The Emperor of Heaven was happy from the bottom of his heart. Perhaps, this was growing up. Without the protection of parents, one could grow up the fastest. He had spoiled her too much in the past. The Emperor of Heaven let out a long sigh. When the Empyrean fairy heard this, she blushed and said shyly, "Father, I was immature in the past and made you worry." The Emperor of Heaven held her hand kindly and said, "Yao, you are my daughter. No matter what you do, Father will support you. This is what a father should do." No, I was immature in the past. When I thought back, I realized that Father had sacrificed too much for me. Too much, the Empyrean fairy said emotionally. It was as if the celestial Varch had eaten honey, and he was so moved that a smile bloomed on his face. You guessed right. There is indeed a secret that the Fu clan can produce generations of Emperor of Heaven. The Emperor of Heaven suddenly said. The Empyrean fairy frowned and asked in surprise, "What secret?" "Heavenly book." Heavenly book? A huge question mark appeared in the minds of the others. What was a heavenly book? The Empyrean fairy had never heard of the heavenly book. She looked at the Emperor of Heaven in confusion. A huge question mark seemed to be carved on her forehead. What is a heavenly book? The heavenly book is the sacred scripture that every generation of Emperor of Heaven studied and cultivated. Only the candidate for the position of Emperor of Heaven has the chance to see the true appearance of the heavenly book. The others do not even have the chance to hear of it, let alone comprehend the mysteries of the heavenly book. Every generation of Emperor of Heaven would spend their entire life searching for the next Emperor of Heaven in the clan. Then they would be groomed. Finally, after passing various tests, they would be taught the heavenly book. It was as if the Emperor of Heaven had slowly pulled open a curtain for everyone, allowing the colorful information to rush in. The Empyrean fairy's reaction could be seen. She was also shocked. Her mouth opened so wide that an egg could be stuffed in. She had lived in the clan for so many years, but she did not discover this secret. However, she did not blame her father. Just like he said, this was the Fu clan's biggest secret. It was normal that she did not know. There is no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world. Outsiders have been guessing for a long time, but in the end they found some clues. They knew that the Fu clan was able to produce generation after generation of Emperor of Heaven. It was just that they did not know about the existence of the heavenly book. The Emperor of Heaven sighed and said regretfully, how could this be? There is nothing absolute in this world, and there is no absolute secret. You must remember this. The Emperor of Heaven solemnly warned, his expression incomparably solemn. The Empyrean fairy was shocked. She subconsciously looked at the others. Since this matter was such a huge secret, why did her father say it in front of so many people? Wasn't he afraid that the walls might have ears? Feng Shishir and the others noticed the Empyrean fairy's gaze and immediately realized this problem. Their hearts became uneasy. Didn't the ancients always like to put on this kind of show? Purposely saying something secret in front of others meant that the people who heard these words would not have long to live. A gust of cold air rose from his back with a whoosh. Compared to the Empyrean fairy and the Emperor of Heaven, they were as weak as ants. They could not withstand a single blow. The Empyrean fairy also thought that her father had such a plan. Her heart sank. She looked at everyone worriedly. She moved her lips and said hesitantly, "Father, they are all my friends." The celestial Varch was very smart and immediately understood what she was thinking. He glanced at the others and they all kept quiet out of fear. It was as if a cold light had flashed past their necks. They suddenly shrank back and subconsciously avoided his gaze. Ha ha ha. The celestial emperor laughed heartily. Yan Qingyi's voice had originally been crisp and clear, but it was less dignified and more amiable. What are you thinking about? They are your friends who fought alongside you, Yao. Why would I harm them? Moreover, the Emperor of Heaven understands the will of the heavens. Why would he kill the innocent? The Empyrean fairy blushed. She almost misunderstood her father. She really should not have. She said embarrassedly, "Father, I'm sorry." The Emperor of Heaven waved his hand and said, "The heavenly tomes might have been a secret a few thousand years ago. However, ever since that incident, it is no longer a secret. Although the public still does not know about it, many people who are observant still know about the existence of the heavenly tomes. This is the secret that allowed the Fu clan to nurture the Emperor of Heaven. That person just now naturally came for the heavenly tomes. That incident? What incident? The Empyrean fairy realized that she did not know about this incident again. She could not help but feel a chill in her heart. She hurriedly asked. It seems like this incident disappeared in the long river of history. That is why it was not passed down. Even you do not know about it. Only a few people were involved in that incident. It is normal that it did not spread widely. The Emperor of Heaven found a reasonable explanation for himself. The Empyrean fairy became more and more confused as she listened. She really did not understand what her father was talking about. However, it must be something very important. The Emperor of Heaven seemed to be deliberately keeping her in suspense. He was still not in a hurry to reveal the key point. Instead, he asked, Yao heir, with your temper, when you woke up that year, you must have investigated how I died. Am I right? The Empyrean fairy nodded her head honestly. Nobody knows a daughter better than a father. However, back then I did not obtain any valuable investigation results. Because firstly, the history is too long. Secondly, this incident seems to be too secretive. Furthermore, our Fu clan has completely disappeared from history. This matter has always been bothering me. Our Fu clan was so powerful back then. How could it disappear just like that? It was as if it had disappeared from the face of the earth. There was no trace of it at all. This was a problem that had always troubled the Empyrean fairy. No matter how hard she scratched her head, she could not figure out the reason behind it. After all, she was a member of the Fu clan. She was one of the people involved. She deeply understood how powerful the Fu clan was. How could it disappear so completely? The Emperor of Heaven's gaze was deep. It was as if he had sunk into deep memories. After pondering for a long time, he said, Perhaps this was the calamity that befell the Fu clan. The Fu clan was at the right place at the right time. They produced many talented people. There was no doubt that they were the #1 clan in the world back then. Perhaps all the good things in the world could not be monopolized by one clan. In the end, the calamity of the clan's annihilation occurred. The calamity of the clan's annihilation? The Empyrean fairy's heart tightened. Her breathing involuntarily quickened. Yes, a mysterious enemy appeared out of nowhere. It was as if he came from another world. He brought with him an undefeatable power and swept away all the powers in this world. As the Emperor of Heaven, the Fu clan was the most powerful clan. Of course, I could not sit idly by and do nothing. In the end, we launched a counterattack. We engaged in one great battle after another with this mysterious enemy. The Emperor of Heaven paused. It was as if he had sunk into deep memories. As the person involved, and even more so as the Emperor of Heaven, he had personally participated in the events of the past. It was still vivid in his mind, as if it had happened yesterday. How he wished that none of this had happened. History could not be repeated. This was an extravagant hope. The others pricked up their ears. They were completely shocked by the shocking description of the Emperor of Heaven. Their curiosity was also aroused. Who are these people? The Empyrean fairy felt as if her heart was being squeezed. She could not hide her anger as she asked. At first, we did not know who they were. But later on, in the great battles, we finally obtained some useful information. They really did come from another world. As for their name, they called themselves the Dragon Slayers. The Emperor of Heaven sighed and said this name with a heavy heart. The 3 words Dragon Slayers meant too many things to him. It was too heavy. Although it had been thousands of years, it was still like a huge boulder pressing down on his heart, making it difficult for him to breathe. Dragon Slayers? The Empyrean fairy was shocked. This name was actually somewhat familiar. Suddenly her mind flashed. She remembered that Tang Zheng had occasionally mentioned this name to her. It seemed to have something to do with the Dragon Clan. But how did the Dragon Slayers have anything to do with the Fu clan's annihilation? What was the secret behind all of this? Her beautiful eyebrows furrowed like 2 curved blades. It was quite sharp. The Emperor of Heaven heard another layer of meaning in his daughter's words. He asked, You also know about the dragon slayers? Chapter 1232. The three words dragon slayer attracted everyone's attention, especially the Emperor of Heaven, who stared at his daughter without blinking. The Empyrean fairy nodded and said, "Yes, I heard Tangjing mention it before. It seems to be related to the dragon race?" Back then, Tangjing had only mentioned it by chance and did not explain in detail, so she only knew half of it. Seeing that his daughter knew about it, and that it was someone else who told her, he could not help but be curious. He looked towards the holy armored shield and said, "He actually knows about the dragon slayer. He is not simple. He has a dragon on him. It should be it who told him." Dragon? The Emperor of Heaven was shocked. He had seen the dragon race before, so he knew how powerful they were. However, the dragon race was arrogant by nature and had powerful Fali, making them extremely difficult to tame. Of course, he had not tamed a dragon before. This brat actually had a dragon on him. This was really unexpected. The Empyrean fairy obviously knew this as well. She was the witness of Tangjing taming the golden dragon. Although it was not glorious, it was still a success. She still admired Tangjing's courage and spirit. "Father, are the dragon slayer really that powerful? Is our entire clan not a match for him?" The Empyrean fairy asked in disbelief. The Emperor of Heaven did not nod or shake his head. After a moment of silence he said, "The dragon slayer is indeed powerful. In terms of individual strength, many people in our clan are not a match for him. Ever since they were born in this world, they had fought against many powerful forces and powerhouses, and they rarely lost. Only after our Fu clan joined in did this situation become more effective. We and the dragon slayer both suffered casualties. After going through many battles, in the end, we finally understood that the dragon slayer came to this world to kill the dragon race. However, the dragon race was very secretive. Before they could find the dragon race, they first came into conflict with us, and then there was a series of battles. The dragon slayer was cruel by nature and killed the innocent. In order to prevent normal people from being killed, we could only fight back. In the end, I led my clan and after careful planning, we started a shocking battle with the dragon slayer. In the end, we perished together and returned this world to a peaceful world." The Emperor of Heaven narrated the events of that year. After so many years with only a few words, it still gave people a feeling of shock and made their blood boil. Everyone's heart was tightly gripped as they stared at the Emperor of Heaven with burning eyes, filled with respect. "You really are too great." Feng Shishir couldn't help but blurt out her praise. The Heavenly Emperor glanced at Feng Shishir indifferently and said, "One must pay a price for greatness. My price was the sacrifice of the entire Fu clan, which is extremely painful. However, if I could do it again, I would still do it. Although the price, the Emperor of the Dragon Slayer of Heaven." "That's why you're so great," Feng Shishir said sincerely. The Emperor of Heaven's eyes were filled with gratification and pride. "Father, in the end you survived, so you still won." The Empyrean fairy understood her father's actions and said with pride, "Did I win?" The Emperor of Heaven did not deny it. Recalling the scene of that year, he shook his head and said, "No, that year I died in battle. I do not know why, but the remnant of my soul was guided by a mysterious force and returned to Heaven's gate. After that, I slept for thousands of years. Today, I was awakened by you all and recovered some of my power." Mysterious force, what is that? The Emperor of Heaven fell into deep thought. After a long time he said, "I have been thinking about this problem for a long time. Now, I finally have a clue. I am the Emperor of Heaven. I listen to the heavens and comprehend the heavenly Tao. Therefore, I believe that it was the heavenly Tao that guided me back to Heaven's gate. Of course, it is also because I still have concerns and obsessions in my heart." Obsessions, of course, were referring to his daughter who had always been in his heart. The Empyrean fairy had always been absorbing pure Yin energy in Heaven's gate. The Emperor of Heaven had always been concerned about this. Even after his death, the remnant of his soul did not forget about this. Then, under the guidance of the heavenly Tao, he returned to Heaven's gate. All of this was extremely mysterious. The people who heard it were shrouded in fog and were amazed. However, the Empyrean fairy did not feel that it was mysterious. This was because the Emperor of Heaven was originally an extremely mysterious existence. That was why others coveted and envied him. Boom. A loud sound came from behind the sacred armored shield, interrupting their conversation. They all turned their heads and looked at the sacred armored shield with different expressions. What's going on? What happened? Feng Shishir and Feng Xinyang said in unison. They revealed anxious expressions and rushed to the sacred armored shield. They were as anxious as ants on a hot pan, but they did not know what to do. Previously, Tang Zheng had repeatedly warned them not to rush in. They were deeply afraid that if they rushed in, it would be too late for regrets. The Empyrean fairy hurriedly looked at the Emperor of Heaven and asked, "Father, the Emperor of Heaven's calm expression also disappeared and revealed suspicion and worry. He said resolutely, "Let's go in. What if we ruin their plans? What should we do?" Feng Xinyang immediately expressed her worry. "With my father here, nothing will happen." The Empyrean fairy was full of confidence. The others looked at each other, and deeply looked at the Emperor of Heaven before retreating to the side. The Emperor of Heaven slowly walked in front of the sacred armored shield, and patted it with his palm. Silently, the sacred armored shield flickered and quickly shrunk. In the end, it became the size of a palm and revealed the scene behind it. Everyone's eyes simultaneously focused on it. When they saw it clearly, they all revealed looks of shock. Tang Zheng and Yi Dingdang were constantly absorbing the pure yin energy in the heavenly bed. Their bodies were rapidly accumulating pure yin energy. The pure yang energy in Tang Zheng's body was being neutralized and his cultivation was also slowly rising. The pure yin energy awakened Yi Dingdang's vitality and gave her a second spring. Moreover, the pure yin energy did not stop flowing into Yi Dingdang's body. It was accumulating bit by bit, and the pure yin energy was increasing. Yi Dingdang's physique was also subtly changing. In the past, she had a pure yin body. With the accumulation of pure yin energy, she suddenly soared to a profound yin body. This kind of qualitative leap also accompanied her cultivation by leaps and bounds. Although she was a martial artist, this kind of leap in level still brought great benefits to her skills and caused a qualitative change. Her inner strength was like a surging river as it flowed through her meridians. A rumbling sound rang out incessantly. Tang Zheng clearly discovered this point and was overjoyed. He knew that he had succeeded. The cultivation in his body had also undergone a qualitative leap. In the end, when the two of them tightly hugged each other and climbed to the peak, the pure yin energy quickly circulated between the two of them, reaching a wonderful state of harmony between yin and yang. Hong. Hong. Two muffled sounds came from their bodies, like thunder, and their bodies were covered with a layer of sparkling luster. Yi Dingdang's eyes also opened. She looked at Tang Zheng with great joy. Everything that happened just now was still fresh in her mind. It was as if she had come back to life. Her body felt completely different. My cultivation. She muttered to herself in shock. She was actually unable to express the joy in her heart. Your cultivation has soared to the great scholar realm. Congratulations. Tang Zheng said with a smile. Yi Dingdang smiled like a flower and said, "Thank you. I feel that you also seem to have changed." She had reached the great scholar realm. Whether it was her vision or feeling, they were all extraordinary. Naturally, she noticed the changes in Tang Zheng. "Yes, I have reached the 3rd grade of the divine transformation realm. This is all thanks to you. If I didn't save you, I wouldn't have had such a fortuitous encounter. Moreover, the most important thing is not the increase in my cultivation, but that I absorbed a large amount of pure yin energy and neutralized the pure yang energy. In a short period of time, my pure yang energy won't erupt again." Really? Yi Dingdang was well aware of the dangers of pure yang energy. Hearing this, she was wild with joy. She was even happier than if she had obtained benefits. Of course. Tang Zheng hugged her tightly and kissed her forehead. "This is all thanks to you." Yi Dingdang rolled her eyes at him. Her gaze fell on his bare and broad chest. Only then did she remember that she and he were not wearing any clothes. Moreover, they had just done that thing. In this unfamiliar environment, with her parents and a group of acquaintances outside, it was really embarrassing. Yi Dingdang was always magnanimous, but this time, she couldn't help but blush. she urged. Hurry up and put on your clothes. Hee, why are you wearing clothes? It's better to be naked like this. Tang Zheng deliberately touched her chest and said mischievously. You're annoying. Yi Dingdang waved her fist and hit his chest like a spoiled child. Tang Zheng's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. He grabbed her fist and pulled her into his arms. Aya, what are you doing? Yi Dingdang was shocked. She didn't expect Tang Zheng to be so daring. He even dared to mess around. Moreover, she had just experienced intense exercise. Her whole body was weak. Like a curve in autumn water, she fell into Tang Zheng's arms. How could she be a match for him? The two of them quickly grappled with each other. Tang Zheng didn't have any other intentions. He just wanted to tease her. Yi Dingdang's reaction was very intense. The two were both experts. They went back and forth and actually fought on the celestial bed. Punches and kicks flew, leaving behind afterimages. Bang! Suddenly, a fist landed on the celestial bed. A dent immediately appeared. Aya, you broke the celestial bed. Yi Dingdang cried out in alarm. Tang Zheng also subconsciously stopped his movements. The celestial bed saved Yi Dingdang, and was also a treasure of the gate of heaven. If he broke the celestial bed, he wouldn't be able to explain it to the Empyrean fairy. Traces of spiderweb-like patterns spread out from the dent. In an instant, the celestial bed became like a spiderweb. It was covered with fine lines. This change shocked the two. They looked at each other in dismay, not knowing what to do. The two had a premonition that the celestial bed was going to be destroyed. It's all your fault. Yi Dingdang glared at him coquettishly. Tang Zheng was resentful. He didn't know how to answer. Before he could finish, there was a loud bang. The celestial bed collapsed. The two of them screamed as they rapidly plummeted to the ground in a freefall. Chapter 1233. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them, and their eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. The place was empty and the bed had disappeared, leaving behind a huge black hole. No one knew what was inside. The Empyrean fairy's eyes widened, and she exclaimed as if she had seen a ghost. What's going on? The bed was the core of the gate of heaven, and it had saved her life before. It had a special meaning to her. Where are they? Feng Shishir also exclaimed. They must be inside the hole. Everyone stared at the black hole. The Emperor of Heaven's eyes shone as he stared at the black hole and muttered. Could this be their opportunity? What do you mean? The Empyrean fairy noticed her father's strange behavior, and quickly asked. The Emperor of Heaven walked step by step to the edge of the black hole, and looked inside. It was pitch black and he couldn't see what was inside. There's something else under the bed. I'm the only one who knows about this. I didn't expect them to accidentally fall in. The Emperor of Heaven said meaningfully. I don't know either. The Empyrean fairy was very surprised. That's right. Back then, in order to save you, I traveled thousands of mountains and rivers, racked my brains, and finally found the gate of heaven, and then found the heavenly bed. In the end, I opened up a space under the bed and hid the secret of the Fu family. The Emperor of Heaven stared at the black hole, and recounted as he recalled. The Empyrean fairy was shocked and she frowned and asked impatiently, could it be the heavenly book? This was the biggest secret of the Fu family. The others had also heard that the Emperor of Heaven's secret was hidden in the gate of heaven. It was probably true. She was wrong to think that there was no secret. Yes, the Emperor of Heaven admitted and pointed at the black hole. It's down there. Everyone's interest was piqued. Although they didn't covet the heavenly book, it would be a great honor to see it in person. Seeing that everyone was staring at the black hole, the Emperor of Heaven said, they've been down there for so long. I'm afraid they're quite frightened. Let's go down. Then, before anyone could react, he flew into the black hole. The Empyrean fairy didn't want to be left behind and flew down with the Emperor of Heaven. The others looked at each other. The Emperor of Heaven didn't stop them. Could it be that he agreed that they could go down too? You guys go down. I'll watch from above and accompany the heavenly thunder. Feng Xingyang took the initiative and said, looking at her husband beside her. Yi Tianlei was heavily injured and had just returned from the gates of hell, so it was not good for him to be jolted. Be careful. Feng Shishir and Yin Luyin impatiently flew down. It was just that the two of them were unable to be as calm as the Heavenly Emperor and the Nine Heavens' profound maiden, as if they were strolling in the courtyard. The black hole seemed to have a magical power. After they jumped in, they were quickly sucked in and fell into the depths. The black hole seemed to have no end. It was pitch black and they couldn't see the end of it. Only the surrounding darkness and dead silence added a sense of oppression. When Tang Zheng and Yi Dingdang landed, they also had this feeling, but his cultivation was after all extraordinary, so he quickly calmed down and activated the true fire to appear from his fingers, illuminating the surroundings. The black hole was pitch black and seemed to be able to absorb light. The real fire's light couldn't penetrate it. Therefore, the real fire only lit up the path ahead and had no other use. After Yi Dingdang got over the initial panic, she quickly grabbed the clothes that fell beside her and urged, "Quickly put on your clothes." Tang Zheng also realized that since there was such a place under the heavenly gate, he couldn't rule out the possibility that there were others. Therefore, it was better not to be naked. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worth it to suffer a loss. The two of them put on their clothes in midair and calmly landed. When their feet landed on solid ground, they both breathed a sigh of relief. However, their curiosity was aroused again. They opened their eyes wide, as if they wanted to see every detail. "Ah, there's someone!" Yi Dingdang exclaimed. She quickly covered her mouth and pointed at a blurry figure in the distance. Tang Zheng's pupils shrank. He also locked onto the figure. Although it wasn't too far away, the figure was somewhat blurry. It gave people an ethereal feeling and was unfathomable. It might be an expert. Be careful. Tang Zheng warned again and again. He pulled Yi Dingdang and carefully walked over. This was the heavenly gate. Everything was mysterious. They couldn't be careless. He couldn't help but regret. When he first landed, he should have flown out and told the Empyrean fairy. Perhaps she would know what was going on. Didn't the outside world always say that the heavenly gate hid a huge secret? Could it be here? The Empyrean fairy had repeatedly denied it. Could it be that she didn't want others to know? As a normal person, they all had a strong desire to spy on others. Tang Zheng was a normal person. Naturally, he was no exception. Therefore, he prepared to investigate thoroughly. If it really was a secret of the Fu clan, then he wouldn't reveal it to the outside world. After all, he had a close relationship with Fu Yao. How could he trick her? Looking at the figure, he muttered in his heart. Who could this person be? Was it someone from the Fu clan? But the heavenly gate was so secretive. This bed had been sealing this black hole, especially with the flood dragon from before. If there was someone here, then they must have lived here for a long time. Perhaps thousands of years. Thinking of this, he was anxious. This person must be an expert. With so many experts gathered, it was too much for the eye to take in. What kind of expert would appear in the Fu clan? Let's wait and see. Yi Dingdang subconsciously held Tang Zheng's hand tightly. At this crucial moment, Tang Zheng was her support. This was a choice that she couldn't help but make. The two cautiously approached the back of the figure. The figure didn't seem to notice them and remained motionless. This person was about the same height as Tang Zheng. He was taller, with a feather fan and a silk headband. He wore a green gown, the standard attire of an ancient person. Tang Zheng coincidentally stopped in his tracks and looked at each other. He couldn't figure out the situation of the other party. Yi Dingdang touched Tang Zheng's arm. Tang Zheng understood and cupped his hands in greeting. He then said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "Junior Tang Zheng and Yi Dingdang accidentally entered this place. If we have offended you in any way, please forgive us." His voice was full of energy and did not lose its dignity. The surroundings were silent. The other party didn't answer him and didn't move at all. It was as if he was deaf. The two of them looked at each other. They didn't understand the deeper meaning behind this, but they weren't people who would sit still and wait for death. They tacitly took 2 steps forward and circled around from the side. They looked up and saw the person clearly at a close distance. Not a person? Tang Zheng's jaw almost dropped. When he looked at the person face to face, although the other party was lifelike and not much different from a real person, he could still tell at a glance. This wasn't a living person. Or rather, It wasn't a real person but a statue. A statue that was so lifelike that it could be mistaken for a real person. The two of them heaved a sigh of relief. It would be great if it was a statue. It was better than encountering an expert from thousands of years ago. Tang Zheng had already encountered many such experts. Most of them had surly personalities and were difficult to figure out. If he were to encounter such a person in the gate of heaven, it would be difficult to predict good or bad luck. Especially since he had Yi Dingdang by his side, he had to take precautions. The two of them stared at the statue intently. The statue had one hand behind his back, and the other hand was holding a scroll. He had a dignified appearance with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. He didn't show any anger, but he gave off an invisible pressure. Even if it was just a statue, if an ordinary person looked at it, their breathing would definitely become heavy. If a statue had this kind of magical power, one could imagine how powerful the real person was. Who could he be? Yi Dingdang felt the same and asked curiously. Tang Jing shook his head and muttered, "I don't know, but he's definitely not an ordinary person." Yi Dingdang nodded in agreement. If Fu Yao comes down, we might be able to find out his identity. This statue is a bit strange, Yi Dingdang said as she stared at the statue in surprise. What's strange? Tang Jing didn't understand. Yi Dingdang pointed at the scroll in the statue's hand and said, "Look, the rest of the statue is made of stone. Only that scroll looks like a real book." After her reminder, Tang Jing suddenly opened his eyes wide and focused his gaze on the scroll. As expected, it was a real scroll. Could it be that there was something wrong with this scroll? There was definitely something wrong with this abnormal situation. Tang Zheng had discovered it, so of course he had to get to the bottom of it. "Senior, please excuse me." Tang Zheng cupped his hands slightly. Although the other party was a statue, he didn't have the slightest disrespect in his heart. He reached out his hand, wanting to take the scroll and see what was inside. However, just as his hand was about to touch the scroll, a mysterious power surged out from the scroll. Whoosh! The mysterious power rippled out in all directions, causing the air to resonate with it. It was as if there were fluctuations in their brains, and a sharp pain instantly invaded their brains. The two of them couldn't help but hug their brains as they cried out in pain. "My head hurts." Yi Dingdang's facial muscles twisted in pain. Although Tang Zheng also had a splitting headache, he still hugged Yi Dingdang and comforted her. "Dingdang, with me here, nothing will happen to you." This mysterious power was attacking his brain, so he couldn't resist at all. Or rather, he didn't know how to resist. "Hurry and make this thing stop." Yi Dingdang bent down and urged him. Tang Zheng's eyes trembled as he fiercely stared at the scroll and said, "I don't believe that I am not a match for a statue like you." He became ruthless as he activated his internal energy. A cold light shot out from his hand and flew towards the statue. No matter how the other party attacked, attacking the statue first was always the right thing to do. However, the attack suddenly stopped, like a clay ox entering the sea. It didn't cause any waves at all. Another wave of intense pain attacked his brain. Ah! He also couldn't help but cry out in pain. To be able to make him cry out in pain, it could be seen how powerful this attack was. Yi Dingdang felt as if her head was about to explode. She cried out in pain, "Hurry and stop! I feel like I'm going to die." Seeing Yi Dingdang in pain, Tang Zheng felt as if a knife was being twisted. He used all of his strength to activate the ancient clear heaven scroll and roared, "I'll fight you to the death." Chapter 1234. Tang Zheng activated the ancient clear heaven scroll. His true qi surged out like a torrential river, instantly pulsing out from his 8 extraordinary meridians. Boom! The true qi transformed into a majestic energy that collided with the mysterious force. The scroll emitted a strange light that clashed with the true qi. Tang Zheng spat out a mouthful of blood that landed on the scroll. The light was immediately tinged with a hint of demonic red. The red light was like a sharp knife that landed in Tang Zheng's eyes. It was as if it wanted to cut open his pupils. "Ah!" He screamed in pain and closed his eyes. The pain was unbearable, but he did not let go of Yi Dingdang's hand. Even if he died, he would not let go. The mysterious force completely enveloped him. He could not move at all. It was as if he had turned into a mummy. "Brat, what did you provoke this time? Do you want me to be buried here with you?" The inner demon's voice sounded. It was flustered and exasperated. Earlier, he had been observing the scene. He had seen many things, but he had never seen anything like this. This was not strange. He was a powerhouse from ancient times. At that time, the Emperor of Heaven had not yet appeared, and the Fu clan had not yet risen. Naturally, he did not take them seriously. Moreover, this space was created by the Emperor of Heaven. What was inside? Perhaps only the Emperor of Heaven knew. The inner demons was also very curious. He did not stop Tangjung in time. Especially that scroll, it felt very mysterious. He could not see through it. This piqued his interest. However, he did not expect that the power of this scroll would be so strong that it would actually force Tangjung into a desperate situation, causing him to fall into a predicament as well. "Is this my fault? If you can stop all of this." Tangjung retorted angrily. Of course, the inner demons had no way to fight back. They could only watch all of this happen, hoping for a miracle that would allow them to escape. Suddenly, a ray of light flickered in Tangjung's mind. This ray of light grew stronger and stronger. Finally, it soared into the sky from the top of his head, illuminating this space. "What is this?" the inner demons exclaimed. Tangjung's head trembled, but he discovered that it was actually the ancient Clear Heaven Scroll's transformation. Ever since the ancient Clear Heaven Scroll entered his brain, it had been quietly lying there without much change. But just a moment ago, the ancient Clear Heaven Scroll shone with a blazing light like the sun. He immediately realized that there might be a turning point. In the blink of an eye, the light broke through his brain as if it was going to rush up to the 9 heavens. The pain in his brain and eyes immediately lessened, and his entire body and mind relaxed. Joy blossomed in his eyes. Could it be that there was really a turning point? Before he could react, the words on the ancient Clear Heaven Scroll fluttered and flew out from his brain, surrounding his body to form a blazing light. It was like a layer of light coat, firmly protecting him. He was stunned, and did not know what adjectives to use to describe it. His brain had lost the ability to think. But the next scene made his jaw almost drop to the ground. The light from the book in the hands of the statue also unexpectedly appeared one by one large words, which complemented the words on the ancient Clear Heaven Scroll, forming a strange picture. Yi Dingdong's painful screams had unknowingly disappeared. Her eyes were wide open, and she looked at this scene in disbelief. The inner demons also looked at this scene, not knowing what was going on. Tangjung also had a stomach full of questions, but he did not have to die. This was undoubtedly a good thing, so he did not deliberately stop all of this, but let nature take its course. "You, what are you doing?" Suddenly, a cry of alarm interrupted Tangjung's thoughts. As far as the eye could see, Yanqingyi's eyes were wide open, staring straight at him. Her expression was quite unfriendly, and it was as if she had changed into a different person. Tangjung smacked his lips, and before he could say a word, the other party had already rushed in front of him like a whirlwind. Her speed was so fast that it made people speechless. When did Yanqingyi become so powerful? Tangjung only had time to ask this question in his mind, and then he saw the other party's hand patting him. He staggered back, and the light completely disappeared. The light from the book in the hands of the statue also disappeared, and everything returned to normal. Tangjung was shocked and angry, and just as he was about to ask what was going on, he saw the Empyrean fairy chasing after him, and respectfully standing beside Yanqingyi. "What are you doing?" the Emperor of Heaven asked with an unfriendly expression. That scene really gave him a fright and gave him an ominous premonition. But in reality, he also didn't figure out what was going on. Tangjung's 2 eyes fiercely stared at Yanqingyi, and said, "What are you doing now? You almost killed me." Fortunately, he didn't do it at the critical moment, otherwise he would have been directly crippled by Yanqingyi's palm. The Emperor of Heaven didn't care so much, and pressed on step by step. His attitude of wanting to condemn him was obvious. The Empyrean fairy was shocked, and quickly stood between the two, and advised, "Father, calm down, what did Tangjung do wrong?" "He is Tangjung." The Emperor of Heaven stared at Tangjung. "I never changed my name, I am Tangjung, so what?" Tangjung raised his head, and stared back at the Emperor of Heaven without fear. Wait a minute. Tang Zheng's mind flashed, and he remembered how the Empyrean fairy addressed the Emperor of Heaven. His eyes almost fell out of their sockets, and he asked in a panic, "What did you just call her?" What was the Empyrean fairy's identity? She actually called him father, and all of this was strange. Wasn't she Yanqingyi? "This is my father, his soul is in Yanqingyi's body." The Empyrean fairy was afraid that Tang Zheng didn't know the details, and would have a conflict with her father, so she explained clearly in a few words. "Your father's soul? The legendary Emperor of Heaven?" Tang Zheng's expression changed dramatically. He had only heard a little about the Emperor of Heaven's illustrious reputation, but it resounded like thunder in his ears. He knew that the other party was a peerless expert. Although he had seen many experts such as Qi Yu, the Yellow Emperor, and the Inner Demons, he still couldn't help but feel his emotions fluctuate when he saw a legendary figure face to face. Yes. The Empyrean fairy nodded heavily, and she shot a glance at Tang Zheng, telling him not to anger her father. Tang Zheng sucked in a breath of cold air, and he stared fixedly at Yanqingyi. He mustered up his courage and said, "Senior, I have no enmity with you, so why are you attacking me?" The Empyrean fairy's heart was in her throat when she heard this, and she looked helplessly at Tang Zheng. He dared to question the Emperor of Heaven face to face, and she had to admit that he was foolish and bold. Tang Zheng's courage was indeed great. He was in the right, and even if the other party was the Emperor of Heaven, he still needed to ask clearly. This was his responsibility to himself. The Emperor of Heaven raised his eyebrows and looked at Tang Zheng in astonishment, as if he hadn't expected that he would dare to question him. Wasn't this the same as eating a leopard's guts? The Emperor of Heaven didn't immediately fly into a rage. His eyes were like a scanner, sizing up Tang Zheng from head to toe, as if he wanted to see through him. "I attacked you because of what you did. What did you do just now?" "That book attacked me and almost killed me and Ding Dang. Don't tell me I'm just going to sit there and wait to be captured?" Tang Zheng's words were mixed with a lot of gunpowder. "If you want to take it away, of course you will be attacked. Do you think that good things in the world are so easy to obtain?" the Emperor of Heaven asked in a mocking tone. Tang Zheng's head moved. He had learned from the Emperor of Heaven that the book wasn't simple, which meant that it wasn't ordinary. "It's just a book. How useful can it be?" Tang Zheng deliberately retorted. The Empyrean fairy's eyes were also unconsciously attracted by the book. She stared straight at it and then looked at the statue, muttering in her heart, "I've been lying on the bed for so many years, but I didn't know that there was a different world under the bed. There's actually a statue and a mysterious book." Book. Her heart shook as a thought suddenly flashed through her mind. She was startled and her eyes went round as if she wanted to see the nature of the book. The book emitted a layer of light that made it impossible for her to see what was real and what was fake. When the Emperor of Heaven heard this, he snorted and said, "You think that it's just a book and doesn't have much use? Haha, short-sighted rat. How dare you say such arrogant words?" Tang Zheng really couldn't figure out the truth of the book and asked, "Then what kind of book do you think it is?" Listen carefully. That is the heavenly book that countless people yearn for even in their dreams." The celestial emperor's voice resonated as his eyes lit up. Heavenly book? When he said this, Tang Zheng didn't feel much. After all, this was the first time he heard of the existence of the heavenly book. He didn't know what it was used for. The Empyrean fairy covered her mouth with her small hand and stared straight at the heavenly book. There was only one thought in her mind. So this is the heavenly book. The others were right. The gate of heaven hid the Fu clan's biggest secret. No wonder people said that if one could see through this secret, then one could become the next emperor of heaven. In fact, this sentence meant that once one obtained the heavenly book and learned to cultivate it, then one could become the next emperor of heaven. This was a huge temptation. No wonder so many people wanted to enter the gate of heaven. Ji Wuxiang gave his all to enter the gate of heaven. Seeing that Tang Zheng's eyes were dark and unmoved, the Emperor of Heaven felt like playing the lute to a cow. He said, "You want to take the heavenly book, but let me tell you, even if you get the heavenly book, you won't be able to understand it." Back then, when facing the huge threat of the dragon slayers, The Emperor of Heaven placed the heavenly book in the gate of heaven, so that it could be passed down continuously. He hoped that his daughter would discover the mystery of the gate of heaven, and obtain the heavenly book to inherit his will. As for whether the Empyrean fairy could learn to understand the heavenly book, he actually didn't have full confidence. The heavenly book's mysteries were beyond imagination. Normal people couldn't understand it at all. Even if it was the Empyrean fairy, the Emperor of Heaven didn't have full confidence. Back then, it was also because of the guidance of the previous generation's celestial emperor that he was able to comprehend the heavenly book's Xianji and learn the supreme divine power. Tang Zheng heard this sentence, but he didn't think so. Back then, Tian Chanzi also said that the ancient scroll of heaven was very profound. In the end, he found that the way to read it was wrong. These ancient people's divine power was not small, but there were many limitations. Their words may not be credible. I'm not illiterate. How can I not understand a book? Tang Zheng refuted. The Emperor of Heaven laughed. You're boasting shamelessly. Since that's the case, I'll let you broaden your horizons. As soon as he finished speaking, he pointed his finger, and the heavenly book flew from the statue. Today I'll be updating 2 chapters. This is the first chapter. Welcome to my WeChat official account. Tang Xiao. Chapter 1235. The heavenly book flew up from the statue's hand, suspended in midair, and slowly unfolded. Tang Zheng and the Empyrean fairy opened their eyes wide at the same time. They could not bear to miss a single detail, and wanted to see the true appearance of the heavenly book. Dong dong dong. The sound of hurried footsteps approached from afar. Feng Shishir and Yin Luyan had also caught up. When they saw the heavenly book shining brightly in the air, the two of them stopped in their tracks at the same time. Heavenly book. These 2 words immediately appeared in both of their minds. Both of their expressions could be described as wonderful. It was as if they were immobilized and stared at the heavenly book without moving an inch. Everyone's eyes fell on the heavenly book. The Emperor of Heaven did not seem to be afraid that these people would see through the mystery of the heavenly book. He displayed the heavenly book naturally and naturally. Huh? Why is there nothing? It's blank? When everyone saw the unfolded heavenly book, they immediately exclaimed. There was not a single word on the heavenly book. It was blank. The wordless heavenly book. They suddenly realized why the Emperor of Heaven swore that Tang Zheng could not see through the secret of the heavenly book. It turned out that there was not a single word on the heavenly book. Who could understand the wordless heavenly book? The Empyrean fairy looked at her father suspiciously. She did not understand what was going on. Haha, you don't understand, right? Who told you to boast shamelessly? There are many things in this world that you can't even imagine. The Emperor of Heaven deliberately ridiculed Tang Zheng, hoping to see his embarrassed expression. Tang Zheng kept staring at the heavenly book. He seemed to be using all his strength to try to see through the mystery. Seeing that Tang Zheng was still unwilling to give up, the Emperor of Heaven said, "Stop looking. Even if you open your eyes wide, you won't be able to see through the mystery of the heavenly book." The heavenly book was a wordless heavenly book. Most people would treat it as a piece of scrap paper and would not pay attention to it at all. Only the Emperor of Heaven of each generation knew the mystery of the heavenly book. It had to be passed down orally by the Emperor of Heaven of each generation in order to see through the mystery. Of course, if one was not talented enough, even with the guidance of the Emperor of Heaven, he could only understand a little bit of the heavenly book. It was impossible for him to become the real Emperor of Heaven. Tang Zheng turned a deaf ear to him. His eyes gradually lit up as he stared straight at the heavenly book. Ha! When the others saw this scene, they involuntarily let out a strange cry and looked at Tang Zheng in surprise. Could it be that he had discovered something? The Empyrean fairy had seen too many extraordinary aspects of Tang Zheng. For a moment, she couldn't make up her mind. She cautiously reminded, "Father, Tang Zheng is a celestial, and he also cultivates many mysterious divine abilities. He's not ordinary." The implication was that he might really be able to see through the mystery of the heavenly book. However, the Emperor of Heaven did not believe it at all. He said disdainfully, "So what if he's a celestial?" Yes, a celestial is indeed not ordinary. He is a rare cultivation genius, but that's for other divine abilities. For the heavenly book, even a celestial is helpless. After pausing for a moment, the Emperor of Heaven seemed to feel that it was not enough. He added, I've also seen a celestial before. So what? I also can't see through the secret of the heavenly book. He's so young, but he wants to see through the mystery of the heavenly book. It's not that I'm looking down on him, but that's just wishful thinking. The Empyrean fairy was naturally proud. Even her bones were filled with pride. This was actually inherited from the Emperor of Heaven. What kind of person was the Emperor of Heaven? He comprehended the heavenly Tao and reached the ears of the heavens. In other words, the Emperor of Heaven was the person who conveyed the will of the heavens. No matter how strong a genius was, the Emperor of Heaven had seen too many of them. But how could they be compared to him? So he did not really think that Tangzheng was that strong. You can't be so absolute. There are all kinds of strange things in this world. Seeing the person she loved being called worthless, Yi Dingdang angrily retorted. The Emperor of Heaven did not even look at Yi Dingdang. He said in a self-righteous manner, Little girl, I've seen many more things than you. You believe him, but I want to tell you that the truth is the truth. There is no room for doubt. Yi Dingdang raised her head, her eyes fervently looking at Tangzheng, and said with incomparable determination, No matter what you say, I believe that what others are unable to do, he may be able to do. Feng Shishir walked over to Yi Dingdang's side. Seeing that she was safe and sound, she let out a sigh of relief. She also raised her head and stood firmly by Tangzheng's side. She defended him and said, Yes, I also believe in him. The Empyrean fairy naturally had faith in her father. But after witnessing Tangzheng create too many miracles, she did not have absolute confidence. She was only half believing and half doubting. The Emperor of Heaven saw through his daughter's thoughts and emotionally said, Yao heir, could it be that you don't believe in father's words? No. The Empyrean fairy quickly shook her head. But your eyes have already betrayed your thoughts. The Emperor of Heaven said bitterly. His daughter did not believe in him. This was a heavy blow to the Emperor of Heaven. If other people did not believe in him, it was because they did not understand him. He really could not find a reasonable explanation for his daughter not believing in him. Father, Tangzheng is really different from other people. The Empyrean fairy tried her best to explain. The Emperor of Heaven coldly snorted as if he was jealous. His daughter actually doubted him because of another man. Without a doubt, this was a serious matter and a huge blow. He coldly looked at Tangzheng and said, If he can see through the mystery of the heavenly book, then I. He stuttered for a long time but did not know what to say. Yi Dingdang was competitive and aggressively said, Then what do you want? The Emperor of Heaven glared at her. He held his breath in his chest and blurted out, I am willing to take him as my teacher. As soon as the words left his mouth, he somewhat regretted it. He was still too impulsive. He was actually provoked by this little girl. If he really lost, then wouldn't he lose a lot of face? Moreover, if he defeated a little brat as his teacher, then wouldn't people laugh their heads off? The Emperor of Heaven's illustrious reputation would be swept to the ground. Once he thought of that scene, his entire body trembled. His heart tightened, and his expression became unnatural. A gentleman's words cannot be taken back. Moreover, you are such a powerful expert. Your words are like gold. You cannot go back on your words. Yi Dingdang was very eloquent and immediately sealed off the Emperor of Heaven's path of retreat. The Emperor of Heaven's neck stiffened. The words of going back on his words could not come out of his mouth. He could not say that it was a joke. That would be too embarrassing. However, he thought about it and felt that he was making a big fuss over nothing. What was the heavenly book? That was a heavenly book that many people could not understand. Only the Emperor of Heaven of each generation could comprehend the mysteries within. What ability did a little brat have to comprehend the mysteries within it? He was really thinking too much. He was just scaring himself. After comforting himself like this, his mood relaxed. He naturally said, A gentleman's words cannot be taken back. Moreover, I am the Emperor of Heaven. How could I make a joke? Especially in front of juniors like you. Yi Dingdong's eyes revealed a hint of joy and said, Then it's settled. Once Tang Zheng comprehends the mysteries of the heavenly book, then you will have to take him as your teacher. This was a business without any cost. If Tang Zheng did not comprehend the mysteries of the heavenly book, then it would be reasonable. He would not lose anything. If he really did comprehend the mysteries of the heavenly book, then having an expert like the Emperor of Heaven as his disciple would definitely be a very good thing. Not only would this make him famous, but it would also increase his strength. This was a good thing that could kill two birds with one stone. Yi Dingdang was incomparably intelligent. In a flash, she understood the pros and cons of this. Empyrean Fairy and Yi Dingdang had been together for a long time. She knew a thing or two about her character. Seeing the crafty look in her eyes, her heart was moved. She secretly cursed. Only before Empyrean Fairy could open her mouth to refuse, she saw Tang Zheng's eyes blossom with light. He opened his mouth and began to recite word by word. Just now, everyone's eyes were attracted by the heavenly book. Tang Zheng was no exception. His eyes burned as he looked at the heavenly book, trying to see the mysteries within. But after looking at it for a while, he did not find anything. Just as he was about to give up, the ancient clear heaven scroll in his mind slowly opened. The large characters flickered with light and continuously spun in his mind. These characters seemed to contain an endless amount of magic. After spinning a few times, they all rushed towards his eyes. At the same time, the ancient clear heaven scroll's heart sutra automatically activated. His Zhenqi circulated according to the ancient clear heaven scroll's instructions. Clang. His eyes seemed to have opened two doors. Then everything that entered his eyes was different. It was covered with a layer of gray light. Even though there was a layer of gray light on everyone's body, he could not help but think of the legendary soul. He seemed to be able to see through the souls of people, but his attention was not on them. Instead, it fell on the heavenly book. The wordless heavenly book had undergone a huge change. Everything else was covered with a layer of gray light. Only the wordless heavenly book was incomparably clear. It was as if he was looking at it with a magnifying glass. He could see every detail clearly. However, this wasn't the most shocking thing. Something even more inconceivable had happened. Words. There were lines and lines of words on the heavenly book. The handwriting was also incomparably clear. Moreover, the handwriting was a little familiar. A light flashed in his mind. Naturally, he remembered the words of the ancient clear heaven scroll that had been hovering in his mind. Weren't those large words exactly the same as the handwriting on the heavenly book? This discovery made Tang Zheng both surprised and happy. The origin of the ancient clear heaven scroll had always been very mysterious. Even Tian Chanzi could not explain it clearly. It was just that he accidentally discovered it in the past. After a life and death battle with the Yin demon, he wanted to take it for himself. In any case, they only knew that the ancient clear heaven scroll was not ordinary. As for what was so special about it, they knew nothing. Tang Zheng also wanted to find out the origin of the ancient clear heaven scroll. But in the end he gave up. Because time and time again he pursued it and ended in failure. In short, the ancient clear heaven scroll was not harmful to him. So he just kept on cultivating it. He never thought that the ancient clear heaven scroll would allow him to see the contents of the heavenly book clearly. The Emperor of Heaven swore that the heavenly book was something that others could not comprehend, but the ancient clear heaven scroll was like a key that helped him unlock the secrets of the heavenly book. Could this be the true function of the ancient clear heaven scroll? Chapter 1236. The ancient clear heaven scroll turned out to be the key to open the heavenly book. This discovery really surprised Tang Zheng. At this moment, the others seemed to have disappeared. He also did not hear the bet between Yi Dingdang and the Emperor of Heaven. All he could see was the heavenly book. The words on the heavenly book seemed to have a life of their own. One by one, they floated up from the heavenly book and shone brightly. Tang Zheng read it out subconsciously. Profound and incomprehensible words came out of his mouth like flowing water, lingering in everyone's ears. Although these words were difficult to understand, they were like heavenly music from heaven. They had a kind of magic that made people's hearts palpitate. Tang Zheng did not find it difficult to understand. He had the foundation of the ancient clear heaven scroll, and seemed to be able to comprehend it by analogy. Looking at the obscure words, he felt very familiar with them. His mind flashed and the words transformed into the corresponding mystery, subtly influencing his body and mind. When the Emperor of Heaven heard what Tang Zheng read out, he was petrified and stared at him blankly. No words could describe his expression. At first, the others were still confused and did not understand what was going on. But after listening for a while and seeing the Emperor of Heaven's reaction, they immediately realized that this was the content of the Heavenly Book. Tang Zheng actually understood the Heavenly Book. The wordless Heavenly Book had nowhere to hide in front of Tang Zheng. Yi Dingdang and the Emperor of Heaven actually won the bet. The news was like a heavy bomb, exploding and disorienting, as if they were in a dream. The Empyrean fairy was dumbfounded. This was the Heavenly Book. She could not see any clues, but Tang Zheng understood it. Her worry had actually become true. Could it be that her father was really going to take Tang Zheng as his master? Thinking of this, her expression changed dramatically. This was more unacceptable than killing him. After all, he was the Emperor of Heaven, an illustrious figure. Taking Tang Zheng as his master, wouldn't it be a joke? In the future, how could he face other people? The Empyrean fairy's eyes were filled with worry. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. However, the Emperor of Heaven did not have the time to think about this. His entire body and mind were shocked by the contents of the Heavenly Book that Tang Zheng read out. The Fu clan also had to be the best of the best. Under the guidance of the Emperor of Heaven, only then could they understand the Heavenly Book. This brat was muddle-headed and accidentally read it aloud. What was going on? Immediately, he realized another serious problem. The heavenly scriptures were such a secret. They were the foundation of the Fu clan. If they were to read it out in public, wouldn't it mean that the secrets of the Fu clan would be exposed to the public? He was so frightened that his whole body trembled. He hurriedly stood in front of Tang Zheng and shouted in a stern voice, "Stop, stop!" Tang Zheng seemed to have been woken up from that mysterious state. He looked at the Emperor of Heaven at a loss and said, "What's wrong?" The Emperor of Heaven's pupils dilated. His eyeballs almost popped out. He stared at him and asked, "Do you know what you are doing?" Tang Zheng's head moved and recalled the scene just now and said, "I should have understood the Heavenly Book." "You also know that you understood the Heavenly Book." "You." The Emperor of Heaven took a deep breath and suppressed the surging emotions in his heart. He asked sternly, "How did you understand it?" "This doesn't seem difficult," Tang Zheng said resentfully. "Not difficult?" The Emperor of Heaven almost spat out blood. He really wanted to hit Tang Zheng. He dared to say that the Heavenly Book was not difficult. Did he know how difficult it was for others to do this? It was impossible. So many people coveted the Heavenly Book, but in the end, they did not obtain it. One of the reasons was that there were people who had seen the Heavenly Book but could not understand it. Therefore, there was no way to see through the mystery. But he said it was not difficult. Was it as easy as eating and drinking? Seeing the Emperor of Heaven's flustered and exasperated appearance, Tang Zheng added, "It really is not difficult. You just need to find the method." Method? The Emperor of Heaven was shocked. Could it be that he really had a method? Otherwise, how could he understand the Heavenly Book on his first try? What method? Find the key. Key? The Emperor of Heaven really wanted to laugh. The Heavenly Book had a key. He had studied the Heavenly Book for so many years. How come he had never heard of it? He had also never heard of it from the past Emperor of Heaven. He stared straight at Tang Zheng and felt that his words were nonsense. He was full of lies and could not be trusted. But the truth was in front of him. He had to restrain his anger and ask clearly, "What is the key?" "A cultivation method." Tang Zheng knew that the Heavenly Book was extraordinary. Moreover, the ancient Clear Heaven Scroll and the Heavenly Book were also related. He had always wanted to understand the origin of the ancient Clear Heaven Scroll, but could not find it. The Emperor of Heaven was experienced and knowledgeable. Maybe he knew a thing or two. In addition, he had seen the Heavenly Book and used the ancient Clear Heaven Scroll to exchange for it. It could not be said that he had taken advantage of it. The Emperor of Heaven's appetite was completely whetted. He could not wait to ask, "What cultivation method?" "I cultivate the ancient Clear Heaven Scroll." I think that the ancient clear heaven scroll and the heavenly book are of the same origin. Once you cultivate the ancient clear heaven scroll, it will be very easy to read the heavenly book. It will be the same as reading a normal book, Tangjung said. Ancient clear heaven scroll? The Emperor of Heaven raised his eyebrows and muttered to himself. He had never heard of the ancient clear heaven scroll. He really did not know why the ancient clear heaven scroll and the heavenly book were of the same origin. If he had not seen the scene just now, he would definitely think that it was a fantasy story and would not believe it. But the truth was right in front of him. He had no choice but to believe it. Do you know about the ancient clear heaven scroll? Tangjung asked expectantly. The Emperor of Heaven looked deeply at him and shook his head. I have never heard of it. What is so special about the ancient clear heaven scroll? The ancient clear heaven scroll requires the cultivator to be a blank piece of paper. Only those who have not cultivated any cultivation method can cultivate it. Tangjung explained. This was the experience that Tian Chanzi had once experimented with. At that time, after Tangjung deciphered the ancient clear heaven scroll, Tian Chanzi also tried to cultivate it. In the end, he found that everything was futile. He already had a cultivation base and could not cultivate the ancient clear heaven scroll. He could only give up. The Emperor of Heaven frowned and said, There is such a strange thing? He had never heard of such a thing. He looked at Tangjung suspiciously. He wondered if it was because his cultivation base was not high enough that he had such a misconception. Tangjung was like a clear mirror. He immediately saw through the Emperor of Heaven's thoughts and said, You don't believe it, right? Then I can pass the ancient clear heaven scroll to you. You will know once you see it. Tangjung was not afraid that the Emperor of Heaven would learn the ancient clear heaven scroll. This was because he believed in Tian Chanzi's original judgment. The ancient clear heaven scroll indeed required the cultivator to be a blank piece of paper. Later on, he became more and more familiar with the ancient clear heaven scroll. Moreover, Tangjung had already finished reading the contents of the heavenly book. This was equivalent to an exchange. The Emperor of Heaven would not casually reveal the contents of the ancient clear heaven scroll to others. After all, he was more afraid that Tangjung would leak the contents of the heavenly book. Tangjung pointed his finger. A ray of light flew out from his fingertip and flew towards the Emperor of Heaven's forehead. The Emperor of Heaven did not refuse and allowed this ray of light to enter between his eyebrows. In the next second, a ray of light flashed in his mind. It turned into an ancient text that sparkled in front of him. He studied it word by word and gradually opened his mouth. His jaw almost dropped to the ground. With his intelligence, of course he could see that the ancient clear heaven scroll was extraordinary. The most important thing was that the ancient clear heaven scroll was indeed of the same origin as the heavenly book. In addition, he had cultivated the heavenly book. His understanding of the heavenly book was very profound. Therefore, when he saw the ancient clear heaven scroll, his heart had more ideas. The ancient clear heaven scroll was not as simple as a key. It meant more things. When he usually cultivated the heavenly book, many parts were obscure and difficult to understand. This was the problem that the previous Emperor of Heaven encountered. However, the Emperor of Heaven was very smart. With his intelligence and high comprehension, they opened up a new path and comprehended many of the obscure parts. However, there was a limit to people. The mysteries of the heavenly book were limitless. They still did not completely decipher the mysteries of the heavenly book. There were many difficult questions left. These difficult questions were the target of the previous Emperor of Heaven. However, in the end there were still many left. The Emperor of Heaven scratched his head and spent countless time, but there was no fundamental progress. Just now, after the Emperor of Heaven read the ancient clear heaven scroll, his mind flashed with the light of wisdom. Many of the obscure problems were solved. It was as if there was a standard answer sheet in front of him. He thought hard for a long time and compared the problems one by one, and the answers were revealed. It was not difficult at all. Instead, it was as simple as a 3-year-old child. The Emperor of Heaven was completely stunned. Although he was mentally prepared, he was still shocked by this discovery. The ancient clear heaven scroll was not a key. It was an existence that defied the natural order, especially for the heavenly book. With the ancient clear heaven scroll, The heavenly book was no longer obscure and difficult to understand. It was as simple as a 3-year-old child. His expression kept changing, as if he was a puppet statue. This unforeseen event caused the others to be dumbstruck and at a loss for what to do. Tang Zheng was also shocked. He asked, "Senior, what's wrong?" The Emperor of Heaven did not answer him. He was immersed in his own world. The Empyrean fairy had never seen her father like this. The shock in her heart was indescribable. Seeing that Tang Zheng was trying to wake her father up, she quickly stopped him. "Calm down, let's not disturb him." Tang Zheng did not know why and asked, "What's wrong with him?" The Empyrean fairy looked at Tang Zheng with a complicated expression. She wanted to say that he was shocked by the ancient clear heaven scroll. Although she was not a roundworm in the Emperor of Heaven's stomach, she could guess a thing or two from his reaction. After all, no one knows a father better than his daughter. But for the sake of her father's face, she was too embarrassed to say so. She showed a bitter smile and said perfunctorily, "It's nothing." The Emperor of Heaven was completely immersed in the ancient clear heaven scroll. He compared it with the heavenly book. All the problems were solved. He had to admit that the two were indeed of the same origin. Moreover, it was not just that. His eyebrows jumped and he muttered to himself, "Outline, outline, this is the heavenly book's outline." Chapter 1237. The General Outline of the Heavenly Book. These 4 words were like a bolt of lightning flashing through Tang Zheng's mind. It was as if he was under a spell as he remained motionless. Only these 4 words echoed in his mind. The ancient clear heaven scroll was the general outline of the heavenly book. What was the general outline? It was the main idea of a set of martial arts. Once one had the general outline, they could cultivate this set of martial arts faster, and help in comprehending the martial arts. Generally, the general outline was short, concise, and to the point. However, the ancient clear heaven scroll was a set of martial arts. This was something that had never been heard of before. A general outline could become a set of martial arts by itself. From this, one could see how extraordinary that set of martial arts was. It was no wonder that the heavenly book was so powerful. It could actually allow people to listen to the heavenly book and comprehend the great Tao, thus achieving the great cause of the Emperor of Heaven. Tang Zheng opened his eyes wide and looked at the Emperor of Heaven. The Emperor of Heaven also seemed to have woken up from a dream. He looked at Tang Zheng and said, "Where did you get the general outline of the heavenly book?" Tang Zheng did not hide anything and gave a brief introduction. When he heard that the person involved, Tian Chanzi, fought with the conspiracy and did not know the exact information of the ancient clear heaven scroll, the Emperor of Heaven could not help but feel disappointed. The Emperor of Heaven's eyes still did not move away from Tang Zheng, as if he did not want to miss any details of his body. Tang Zheng was looked at so unscrupulously. He coughed and said, "Senior, do you have any other questions? How did you get such a great opportunity?" The Emperor of Heaven muttered to himself. Tang Zheng rolled his eyes. He thought to himself, "Why can't I have such a great opportunity?" The others also recovered from their shock. They only understood half of what the two were talking about. However, one thing was certain, and that was that Tang Zheng understood the heavenly book. Yi Dingdang cheered, "Wow, that's great. Tang Zheng, you really understood the heavenly book." Hee, someone once made a bet that if Tang Zheng could understand the heavenly book, he would have to worship him as his teacher. After hearing Yi Dingdang's words, the Emperor of Heaven's face changed from red to white. What kind of person was the Emperor of Heaven? How could he accept a random master? Who in this world was qualified to be his master? Just now, he had only casually agreed to the ridiculous bet in a moment of desperation. When he agreed to it, he regretted it. This was mainly because he had too much confidence in himself, too much confidence in the heavenly book, and too little confidence in Tang Zheng. Who would have thought that a single slip would lead to everlasting regret? What should he do now? Could it be that he really wanted to take Tang Zheng as his teacher? Then where was the Emperor of Heaven's reputation? Where was the Fu clan's reputation? The Empyrean fairy's face also changed. She bit her lips, wanting to help her father. Yiding was not afraid of the heavens or the earth. The heavenly emperor looked down on Tang Zheng so much, which made her feel indignant. she said. Don't make a promise and then turn your head to deny it. Cough cough. Tang Zheng coughed dryly and interrupted both parties. He asked suspiciously, what's going on? Taking him as my teacher? Yi Dingdang blinked her eyes and began to talk at the same time, vividly describing the bet from just now. Tang Zheng suddenly realized that so many things had happened in that short period of time. He was completely immersed in the wonderful state of the heavenly book, and did not hear this at all. Looking at the Emperor of Heaven, who did not know what to say, how could Tang Zheng not understand his thoughts? Of course, he understood the Emperor of Heaven's thoughts even more. Seeing that the Emperor of Heaven was about to speak, Tang Zheng was deeply afraid that he would really agree in a fit of anger. That would not be a good thing for him, but a hot potato. What was the status of the Emperor of Heaven? Taking him as his teacher? What a joke. Although it would make his reputation even more famous, it would also bring trouble. The Empyrean Fairy had a close relationship with him, and had helped him a lot. If the Emperor of Heaven took him as his teacher, then what would the Empyrean Fairy do? How would she get along with Tang Zheng? Wouldn't she hold a grudge in her heart and be hostile towards him? Everything was far from as simple as it looked on the surface, and there were also not many benefits. In a flash, Tang Zheng understood the stakes. Of course, he also understood the intention of Yi Dingdang's actions. It was very simple. It was to build up Tang Zheng's reputation. However, this was not the way to build up one's reputation. Yi Dingdang's thinking was too simple. Tang Zheng's expression changed and said very seriously, Senior, you must not do this. This is Dingdang's joke with you. How can you take it seriously? We can come to the heavenly gate and enjoy the pure yin energy provided by the heavenly bed. This is all thanks to Senior. We should be thanking you. Tang Zheng's words were sincere and not fake. The Emperor of Heaven saw this and felt much better. Originally, he was somewhat angry that the heavenly book was obtained by Tang Zheng. After all, since ancient times, the heavenly book was passed down to the Fu clan. Now that it had fallen into the hands of an outsider, it was a mistake. At this point he was powerless to change it, and even more impossible to kill Tang Zheng. Tang Zheng accidentally obtained the ancient Clear Heaven Scroll. This was fate with the heavenly book, and it was the will of the heavens. Yi Dingdang gave Tang Zheng a deep look, and was slightly stunned. She immediately remembered that the reason why she was able to escape danger was all thanks to the heavenly bed, which belonged to the Fu clan. All of this was bestowed by the Fu clan. How could he make such a ridiculous request? She was not an unreasonable person. Just now, she was filled with righteous indignation and felt injustice for her beloved. Now that she had calmed down, she also understood that the effect of her nonsense was too bad. She almost made a big mistake. She resentfully lowered her head and apologized to the Emperor of Heaven. Senior, I'm sorry. I was just joking just now. Please don't take it seriously. The Emperor of Heaven was in a difficult position. He did not expect Tang Zheng to be so considerate, and actually give him a way out. He could not help but look at him in a new light. He had seen many young talents, but it was rare to see such a person who understood the big picture. His impression of Tang Zheng improved greatly. He is so young and already fated with the heavenly book. His future is limitless. It's a pity that he is not a member of the Fu clan. The Emperor of Heaven sighed secretly. Suddenly, his gaze subconsciously fell on his daughter. His heart skipped a beat. It was as if a bolt of lightning flashed across his mind. A bold idea came to him. The Fu clan had an ancestral rule that the heavenly book was not to be passed down to outsiders. Now that it was leaked, it was a fact and could not be changed. More importantly, all of this seemed to be the will of the heavens. He was the Emperor of Heaven, and could not go against the will of the heavens. But the ancestral rule could not be violated. Was there a way to get the best of both worlds? Of course there was. Just now, he had a flash of inspiration and thought of such a way. That was to turn Tang Zheng into a member of the Fu clan. This way, it would not go against the will of the heavens, and would not go against the ancestral rule. It was really the best way. Tang Zheng could not change his name. This was a disgraceful thing. There was no way to coerce him. But there was one thing that could be changed, and that was that he could become a member of the Fu clan. The only way was to form a marriage alliance with a member of the Fu clan. Then he would become a son-in-law of the Fu clan, and would naturally be a family. The Fu clan had been exterminated many years ago. The only woman left was the Empyrean fairy. As long as Tang Zheng and the Empyrean fairy were married, everything would be solved. The Emperor of Heaven could not help but feel proud of his wisdom. He looked at Tang Zheng with a thought-provoking gaze. The more a mother-in-law looked at her son-in-law, the more satisfied she was. In fact, the father-in-law looked at his son-in-law not much different. Tang Zheng was a celestial with the 9-yang saint body. It was a perfect match for the Empyrean fairy's 9-yin saint body. As long as the two of them were married, their yin and yang would be balanced. It would be greatly beneficial to their bodies and cultivation. They did not even need to rely on too much pure yin and yang energy. The two of them could rely on each other's pure yin energy to reach a state of balance between yin and yang. Their lives would not be in danger. Of course, this was also a special case. Once the cultivation increased too much and accumulated too much pure yang energy or pure yin energy, the other person might not be able to reach a state of balance between yin and yang and turn danger into safety. But one thing was certain, and that was that the combination of the two had more advantages than disadvantages. The Emperor of Heaven had never thought of finding a good husband for the Empyrean fairy. At that time, she was too young and was facing the threat of the 9-yin saint body. Her life was more important, and he did not have the time to think about this. Later, the Empyrean fairy was sealed in the gate of heaven for thousands of years. The Emperor of Heaven fell in the battle with the dragon slayer, and the Empyrean fairy's marriage was put aside. The Emperor of Heaven was resurrected, and the instinctive thoughts of a father also came to life. This was especially true for the ancient people. One of the most important things was the marriage of their children. The Emperor of Heaven had always wanted to make it up to his daughter. Marriage was naturally the most important thing. The Empyrean fairy did not notice this at all. She only breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, her father did not have to defeat Tang Zheng as his master. She knew that all of this was done for her father's sake. She could not help but cast a grateful look at Tang Zheng. Tang Zheng responded with a smile. There was a tacit understanding between the frown and the smile. The Emperor of Heaven saw all of this and smiled in his heart. It seemed that a lot of things had happened while he was not around. Moreover, his thoughts were not necessarily a random matchmaker. From the looks of these two people, the relationship between them was not ordinary. The Emperor of Heaven also breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. For a moment, the thing that he was most concerned about was taking shape. Tang Zheng had resolved a possible crisis. His attention fell on the heavenly book again. The heavenly book returned to the appearance of the wordless heavenly book. Tang Zheng knew that once he activated the ancient scroll of heaven, the big words would fly into his eyes. Then he would be able to clearly see the words on the heavenly book. He did not have to work hard to read the heavenly book anymore. The words on it had been completely imprinted in his mind, and could not be erased. Every one of them seemed to have magic. They drilled into his mind and imprinted in every nerve, as if they wanted to integrate with him. However, his attention was quickly attracted by something else. He did not know if it was because of the heavenly book, but he felt that the motionless statue had become a little subtle. The Emperor of Heaven's attention was also attracted by Tang Zheng. Seeing him staring at the statue, he could not help but smile and ask, "Did you see anything?" Tang Zheng nodded, and then shook his head. He said in a daze, "I saw a little, but I also felt that I could not see anything." Ha ha. The Emperor of Heaven laughed loudly. "That's right. Right? What did he mean?" Not only Tang Zheng, but the others were also interested. They focused their attention on the statue again, as if they wanted to see some clues. However, in their eyes, the statue was no different from before. Chapter 1238. The Emperor of Heaven looked at everyone's doubtful eyes and pointed at the statue, saying, "Yao, or do you recognize this statue?" The Empyrean maiden looked at the statue from head to toe. Memories from long ago flooded her mind and occupied her mind in an instant. She opened her eyes wide in disbelief and asked, "This statue is from the ancestral shrine." The Emperor of Heaven nodded in satisfaction, saying, "You didn't have many chances to enter the ancestral shrine in the past, but you still remember this statue. It's not easy." "That's right, this is the Fu clan's ancestor, Fushi." Fushi. Once this name came out, everyone was shocked. This was the Fu clan's ancestor. A long time ago, the Fu clan was not strong and prosperous, but ever since Fushi was born and cultivated to the level of the Emperor of Heaven, the Fu clan rose to power and became stronger and stronger. Without Fushi, the Fu clan would not have become so strong. Everyone's eyes were immediately attracted to the statue, as if they wanted to see what was different about this Fu clan's ancestor. But to their disappointment, Fushi looked like a pale-faced scholar instead of a brawny man who was 8 feet tall and had a circumference of 8 feet. Regarding Fushi's magnificent life, there were only a few records in history, but it was enough to make people intoxicated. Now that they were looking at the statue, they couldn't help but feel emotional. Bang! The Empyrean fairy knelt down on both knees and kowtowed deeply, bowing respectfully. Seeing this scene, everyone was deeply shocked. She was the Empyrean fairy, and she was actually bowing to a statue. It was clear how high Fushi's position was in the hearts of the Fu clan. Tang Zheng had been thinking about the Emperor of Heaven's words and asked, "What do you think is wrong with this statue?" The Emperor of Heaven took a deep look at Tang Zheng and said, "We'll have to start from the heavenly tomes. It is said that our ancestors were favored by the heavens, and were bestowed with spells, and imparted the heavenly tomes. This is the origin of the heavenly tomes. The heavenly book is a book that is impervious to fire and water. There is not a single word on it. It is called the wordless heavenly book. However, our ancestors' magic was bestowed by the heavens, which allowed him to see through the secrets of the wordless heavenly book. From then on, he passed down this method. Every generation of the Emperor of Heaven has to pay homage to the statues of the ancestors, and obtain the blessings of the ancestors. This way, the Emperor of Heaven's path will be smooth sailing." The Emperor of Heaven talked nonstop. The others pricked up their ears and heard every word clearly. Tang Zheng concentrated. He knew that after such a long foreshadowing, they were about to get to the main topic. Beautiful novel cotton candy as expected. The Emperor of Heaven continued. The statues of the ancestors contain the great Tao that the ancestors condensed throughout their lifetime. When they pay homage to the statues of the ancestors, the Tao intent in the statues will evolve bit by bit. They will be blessed and benefit their descendants. Tao intent. Tang Zheng raised his eyebrows and his heart was slightly moved. He had heard many people talk about the great Tao, but he himself only knew half of it, and didn't even have any comprehension. Yan Qingyi comprehended the great Tao of heaven and earth, and obtained the divine ability of prophecy. However, what exactly was the great Tao of heaven and earth? Yan Qingyi couldn't clearly explain it. The great Tao couldn't be seen or touched. Laymen knew nothing about it, and couldn't even touch the threshold. This was a world of difference from ordinary cultivation. Now that he heard that this statue actually contained the great Tao, after paying homage, the mysterious Tao intent could be blessed. It was too magical. With Tang Zheng's knowledge, he still couldn't understand all of this. He looked at the statue with a strange expression, and didn't get anything. The Emperor of Heaven didn't care about the shocked expressions of the others. As for whether they could understand the profound meaning, he didn't care even more. After he finished speaking, the Emperor of Heaven stared at Tang Zheng and added, "You have something to do with the heavenly book and also fate with the great Tao. What you see with your eyes is very different from others. Others can't see the mystery of this statue, but you are different." Tang Zheng's heart trembled. The feeling this statue gave him was indeed extraordinary, and was quite different from others, but he still could not see through the mystery behind it. After the Celestial Emperor's words, there was a sense of enlightenment. Could it be like what the Emperor of Heaven said? I have fate with the great Tao and the heavenly book, so even the feeling between this statue and me has become different. Tang Zheng thought to himself. The others widened their eyes and tried their best to see the so-called Tao intent in this statue. In the end, their eyes were red and tears were about to fall, but they still couldn't see anything different. Could it be that he really had no fate with the great Tao? Everyone couldn't help but feel discouraged. Even the Empyrean fairy was no exception. As a member of the Fu clan, She didn't have as many opportunities as Tangjing did. She indeed felt frustrated. The Emperor of Heaven looked at the others, and his gaze fell on the Empyrean fairy. He knew his daughter very well. How could he not know what she was thinking? He comforted her. Yao, or you can't force anything. You will have your own opportunities. In fact, if the Empyrean fairy really had fate with the great Tao, he would have taught her the heavenly book long ago. Why would he keep it a secret from her? The Empyrean fairy also thought of this, and the corner of her mouth twitched. She smiled bitterly and said, Father, I understand. The Emperor of Heaven sighed. Although he was the Emperor of Heaven and had great powers, he couldn't do anything about this. Since you said that I have fate with the great Tao and the heavenly book, why can't I get the Tao intent in this statue? Tangjung asked again. His attention was completely attracted by the statue, and he couldn't help but feel excited. He was facing so many strong enemies and urgently needed to become stronger. This was a rare opportunity, and he couldn't just let it go. Ha! The Emperor of Heaven heard and laughed loudly. I said it very clearly just now. You have to worship the statue before you can get the Tao intent in it. Tangjung frowned. What kind of spell was this? Could it be that the statue could really transmit Tao intent to him if he worshipped it? Tangjung, do you still remember the life totem? The inner demon's voice suddenly sounded in Tangjung's mind. Tangjung was slightly taken aback. He had a deep memory of the life totem, so how could he forget? I remember, but what does this have to do with the life totem? He didn't understand. Have you heard of the same thing? The inner demons asked. Worshipping this statue is similar to worshipping the life totem. In ancient times, one of the most important ways for the ancients to obtain energy was through worshipping their ancestors or totems. As such, worshipping was very popular. During worshipping, the power of the ancestors or totems would be blessed, and these people would obtain what they wanted. Do you understand? Tangjung was dumbstruck. He didn't think that this was the same principle as worshipping the life totem. Fushi's era was very long ago, so he must have worshipped totems as well. He had used the same principle to hide the great Tao he had learned in his life within the statue to bless later generations. Of course, his situation was very different from ordinary totem worshipping. Ordinary totem worshipping only needed to perform the corresponding ceremony and chant the corresponding incantation, and the worshipper would obtain the corresponding energy. But he was different. Ordinary people would obtain nothing even if they worshipped the statue. Only those who were fated with the great Tao and the heavenly tomes would be able to obtain its Tao intent. This was even more complicated, and the threshold was even higher. It was clear that Fushi had taken great pains to not waste his life's knowledge on unnecessary people. Tangjung was deeply moved. After understanding the mystery, Tangjung looked at the statue again. He felt that it was even more extraordinary, and his eyes flickered. The Emperor of Heaven seemed to see through his thoughts and said, You are fated with the great Tao and the heavenly tomes. By worshipping your ancestors, you can naturally obtain their great Tao intent. Fushi's Tao intent was an unparalleled sacred item, and no one else could touch it. The Emperor of Heaven was so generous because he had already made up his mind. Once Tangjung obtained Fushi's Tao intent, the Emperor of Heaven would think of ways to make him a member of the Fushi clan. There was no doubt about it. However, the two people involved, Tangjung and the Empyrean fairy, were unaware of it, and their attention was focused on the statue. Hearing the Emperor of Heaven's words, the others were immediately envious. Tangjung's luck was off the charts, and he could obtain Fushi's Tao intent. Seeing that Tangjung was still in a daze and did not say a word, Yan Luyin was the first to be unable to sit still, and urged in a low voice, Young Master Tang, what are you still in a daze for? Quickly agree to him. He could not wait for such a good thing to happen to him, but he did not have such an opportunity, so he could only give up. Of course, he could not bear to see Tangjung miss out on such a great opportunity. Yi Dingdang and Fang Shishir's hearts were raised to their throats as they were deeply afraid that Tangjung would refuse. This was a good thing that many people yearned for even in their dreams. If he were to refuse, then he would be an idiot. Tangjung was not a fool, and he also desperately wanted to obtain Fushi's Tao intent. He did not have an excessive request, and it was just worshipping the statue, So what was wrong with that? Fuxi was an ancient, and Fuxi's descendants had done him a great favor, so worshipping Fuxi was a logical thing to do. All right. But what kind of ceremony? Tang Zheng agreed immediately. The Emperor of Heaven heaved a sigh of relief, afraid that Tang Zheng would refuse. The Fu clan was no more, and only he and his daughter were left. His daughter was not a suitable candidate, so wouldn't the Emperor of Heaven's legacy be lost in his hands? Absolutely not. He had inherited the legacy of the Fu clan's ancestors, so he had to pass it on. This was his duty and responsibility, and now, the only suitable candidate was Tang Zheng. If he refused, it would mean that the Emperor of Heaven's legacy would be lost. Then he would not be able to face the ancestors of the Fu clan, and the past generations of Emperor of Heaven. But when he thought of his anxious thoughts, he felt a little depressed. Others could not get this kind of opportunity, but he was worried that Tang Zheng would refuse. This, he really could not find the words to describe it. Tang Zheng did not understand the Emperor of Heaven's thoughts, and was worried that he would make some excessive request. Ancient sacrificial ceremonies had many strange rules. Slaughtering livestock was the most common thing, and the most outrageous was slaughtering living humans for sacrifice. That was extremely cruel. The Emperor of Heaven looked at Tang Zheng with mixed feelings, and thought to himself, first you have to inherit the Tao intent of ancestor Fuxi, then you must become a member of the Fu clan, and then you must listen to me, your senior. Chapter 1239. The Emperor of Heaven said solemnly, "The ceremony is just a facade. If you are sincere, it will work. When you worship the ancestors, the most important thing is the intention. When the intention is there, the ancestors will naturally know." These words were very mysterious. If you are sincere, it will work. This was a common trick used by many Jianghu swindlers. If someone else said this, Tang Zheng would definitely snort and roll his eyes at them. When these words came from the Emperor of Heaven, no one dared to question or refute. They calmed down and quietly comprehended the true meaning of these words. The Emperor of Heaven was not lying. This was what Fuxi had instructed back then, and no one dared to change it. For so many years, the Emperor of Heaven had been like this. When they worshipped Fuxi, they paid particular attention to sincerity. When they were sincere, the ancestors would work and bestow them with the Tao of the Great Way, helping them on their path to becoming the Emperor of Heaven. After the Emperor of Heaven finished speaking, he kept his mouth shut and did not say anything else, leaving Tang Zheng time to think. Tang Zheng understood. He did not kneel and kowtow like the Empyrean fairy. Instead, he bowed slightly to the statue like a courteous and knowledgeable person. He clasped his hands together and said, "Junior Tang Xiao greets Ancestor Fuxi." As soon as he finished speaking, it was as if he had been immobilized. He remained motionless in that posture like an old monk in meditation with his eyes closed. His vision turned black. The statue disappeared. Everything disappeared. He did all this as if he had good luck, and there was a force guiding him. Suddenly, a ray of light lit up. Although he had closed his eyes, he could see this scene. It was incomparably magical. The outside world remained the same, calm and tranquil. The statue was still the same statue, motionless. The people were still the same people, just like before. But there was no light in front of Tang Zheng. These people did not know how Tang Zheng felt. They did not say a word and stared at him, afraid to disturb him. Tang Zheng was as calm as still water, neither sad nor happy. The mysterious light in front of him gradually converged and changed shape. He quietly watched this scene without the slightest surprise or fright. When the light gradually faded and a human figure appeared, a strange feeling welled up in his heart. However, he did not panic in the slightest. Instead, he was quiet and peaceful like a baby. Ever since he started cultivating, he had rarely experienced such peace and tranquility. The Emperor of Heaven watched this scene quietly without saying a word. The Empyrean fairy wanted to ask more, but when she saw the look in her father's eyes, she swallowed her words. The Emperor of Heaven could clearly feel the changes in Tang Zheng's realm. Before, Tang Zheng was like a raging sea, but now, he was like an old well without ripples. He was the complete opposite, like a completely different person. A person who could enter a meditative state so quickly must have cultivated to a certain level. At such a young age, Tang Zheng was supposed to be at the peak of his youth, yet he was able to do this, causing others to look at him in a new light. The Emperor of Heaven sighed secretly. Tang Zheng was more extraordinary than he thought. This might be the reason why heaven chose him. He took a deep look at the statue of Fuxi and thought, "Ancestor, could it be that all of this is also your arrangement?" All of this was too coincidental. If the Empyrean fairy had not brought him to the divine gate, he would not have discovered the heavenly book. The ancient clear heaven scroll would have been covered in dust, and would never have been connected with the heavenly book. If all of this was not fate, what could it be? There was no other explanation. The scene in front of Tang Zheng changed again. The light gathered together and finally turned into the appearance of a person. It was so vivid that it seemed to be smiling at him. After seeing the person's face clearly, Tang Zheng was shocked. It was very familiar. He was very surprised and exclaimed, "Fuxi." This person was exactly the same as the statue. How could he be wrong? Fuxi walked towards him step by step. He subconsciously wanted to step back, but found that he was motionless. Fuxi's pressure was so strong that Tang Zheng could not imagine it. Fuxi seemed to be smiling. It was more lively than the statue. His eyes seemed to have magic, instantly attracting Tang Zheng's gaze and making him immersed in it. Fuxi walked in front of him and slowly stretched out his finger. There was a faint light on the tip of his finger, but it did not look like a cold shining weapon. Instead, it gave people a very strange feeling. The energy contained in the tip of his finger was earth-shattering, but it was not exposed. The tip of his finger touched Tang Zheng's chest. Tang Zheng subconsciously wanted to dodge, but he was powerless. He could only watch the tip of his finger touch his chest. That ray of light instantly entered his chest and disappeared into his body. Before he could figure out what was going on, the scene in front of him changed and ripples appeared in front of him. Fuxi became blurry. The smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more intimate. He stepped back step by step like a tide. The light in his body burst out and instantly flooded his internal organs and meridians. It rushed to his brain. The words on the ancient scroll of clear heaven lit up and sparkled. At the same time, another text appeared little by little. This text was exactly the same as the handwriting on the ancient scroll of clear heaven. The heavenly book. Tang Zheng was delighted. Although he had previously memorized the contents of the heavenly book, his brain did not produce such a heavenly book. This was like a copy of the heavenly book that was vividly displayed in his mind. It complemented the ancient scroll of clear heaven and was extremely mysterious. Could this be because of the Tao will? Tang Zheng was stunned. He remembered that he worshipped to obtain the Tao will. However, other than this light, he did not gain anything else. Could that light be the Tao will? He did not guess wrong. That light was indeed the Tao will. He sincerely worshipped, and was also a fated person. Fuxi's spirit manifested, and with a single finger, his Tao intent was transmitted from his fingertip to Tang Zheng's heart. The Tao will was like blood that quickly spread to every part of his body. The Tao will activated the heavenly book. When people browsed the heavenly book, even if they saw the contents, without Fuxi's Tao will as a guide, the heavenly book would not be able to display its full effect. Only with the guidance of Fuxi's Tao will could the true effect of the heavenly book be activated. At this moment, Tang Zheng had achieved this and was enjoying this extraordinary gain. He confirmed his guess and was secretly delighted. He quickly calmed his mind and studied the heavenly book bit by bit. Wisps of understanding seeped into his brain like a silent moisturizer. The genuine qi in his body was not turbulent. Instead, it was as still as water in an ancient well without any waves. However, the genuine qi was increasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. In particular, his ninth main meridian flashed with golden light. In an instant, his entire body was enveloped by the golden light. He looked solemn and gave people a sense of oppression from the inside out. The ninth main meridian was already extraordinary when it merged with the dragon vein in Emperor Qin's mausoleum. It seemed that under the stimulation of the heavenly book, the ninth main meridian was particularly active. In the golden light, his body became transparent, and the ninth main meridian could be seen clearly. Everyone else stared with wide eyes. when they saw the ninth main meridian that looked like a golden dragon. Apart from the Emperor of Heaven and the Empyrean Fairy, everyone was shocked. Ordinary people only had 8 main meridian, but Tang Zheng had 9 main meridian. His body structure was different from ordinary people's. No wonder he was so powerful. The Emperor of Heaven was also looking at the 9th main meridian with envy. Although the Emperor of Heaven's cultivation base was high, he was also envious of the Celestials' body structure. This allowed Celestials to be stronger than others at the same cultivation base. The 9th main meridian was able to store even more Zhenqi, increasing one's battle strength and endurance. It was also able to play a more powerful role. This point was obvious. Tang Zheng opened his mouth, and golden Sanskrit words flew out from his mouth one by one. The Kshitigarbha Sutra. The Empyrean Fairy immediately recognized it. Those golden Sanskrit characters were the Kshitigarbha Sutra, the supreme item used to suppress Asuras. Once the Kshitigarbha Sutra appeared, Tang Zheng's appearance became even more solemn. What is the Kshitigarbha Sutra? The Emperor of Heaven had never heard of the Kshitigarbha Sutra before. In addition, when he had inherited Fushi's Tao intent, although there had been a manifestation, it had been quite different from Tang Zheng's. It's a cultivation technique created by the Ghost Realm's Dizang of Goguryeo. It's not simple. The Empyrean Fairy also didn't know much about the Kshitigarbha Sutra, so she could only give a rough answer. The Emperor of Heaven's eyebrows jumped and he muttered to himself, he actually has a connection with the Ghost Realm. Dizang of Goguryeo? Isn't the Ghost Realm's 10 Yama Kings reigning supreme? When did this Dizang of Goguryeo appear? The Emperor of Heaven wasn't completely ignorant of the Ghost Realm. The Ghost Realm and the human realm were like mother and child realms, so they had always coexisted peacefully. However, the Emperor of Heaven knew that the Ghost Realm's strength was extraordinary. They had always been led by the 10 Yama Kings, so they weren't easy to deal with. The Empyrean Fairy was unable to answer the Emperor of Heaven's question, so she angrily said, only he knows all of this. He once went to the Ghost Realm. The Emperor of Heaven suddenly understood and nodded. Celestials had the 9 Young Saint body. Only with this special body could they freely travel through the Ghost Realm, and know so many things about the Ghost Realm. The Emperor of Heaven's eyes shined as he looked at Tang Zheng. The Kshitigarbha Sutra's Sanskrit characters danced around his body. Not long after, the Sanskrit characters descended and covered Tang Zheng's body. The Sanskrit characters intertwined to form a cloth-like item. Kasaya. The Emperor of Heaven's pupils shrunk as an almost forgotten item appeared in the depths of his memories. That was an extremely long time ago when there were hundreds of schools of thought. Hundreds of schools of thought contended, and all kinds of learning and magic formed their own schools. It was a very prosperous and enlightened era. Some people said that it was the best era, while others said that it was the worst era. That was because there were many possibilities in that era. In the ancient era, after cultivation had sprouted and experienced the initial ignorance, it gradually prospered and formed many schools of thought. Hundreds of schools of thought contended, and many geniuses were born. Many new cultivation methods were born, and there was intense competition. Among them, there was a school of Buddhism. The people of the school of Buddhism wore kasayas and had solemn appearances. They loudly chanted the name of Buddha and blossomed with resplendent light. They left behind a thick and colorful stroke in that era of hundreds of schools of thought contending. Buddhist cultivation focused on enlightenment, and cultivation focused on opportunity. They had very few disciples, and in the end they declined and disappeared from history. Chapter 1240. The reason why people like Qi Yu and the inner demons in ancient times didn't know about the conflict between martial artists and cultivators was because they were still in the early stages of cultivation. All kinds of messy cultivation existed, and there was no division. Beautiful novel Cotton Candy later, in the era of the 100 schools of thought, cultivators and martial artists became the only 2 remaining cultivation factions, and gradually became antagonistic. This Kasaya pulled the Emperor of Heaven's memory back to a long time ago. His gaze became deep, and he pondered in his heart. Buddhism has long disappeared and no longer exists in this world. How did Tang Zheng cultivate Buddhism's techniques? Ksitigarbha Sutra. The Emperor of Heaven's heart moved, and he immediately thought of the key point. Could it be that Ksitigarbha Sutra was a Buddhist technique? Only this reason could explain all of this. Suddenly, the Emperor of Heaven became interested in Ksitigarbha Sutra, and his interest in Dizang of Goguryeo increased greatly. Only Dizang of Goguryeo was a Buddhist, which could explain all of this. Buddhism in the human world had disappeared, and he didn't expect that there was still a member in the world of spirits and souls, and he carried forward Buddhism's supernatural powers. Although the Emperor of Heaven had never been to the world of spirits and souls, and he didn't understand the current situation of the world of spirits and souls, but one thing was certain: Dizang of Goguryeo's position in the world of spirits and souls was definitely not low. He had guessed correctly. Buddhism was a short-lived flower in ancient times, and I didn't expect it to take root and flourish in a new soil. Perhaps this is the opportunity that Buddhism talked about. Buddhism didn't establish itself just because the time wasn't right. He looked at Tangjung thoughtfully. He cultivated Ksitigarbha Sutra. Could it be that Buddhism also borrowed his hand to make a comeback and try to open up its own territory in the human world? This time, the Emperor of Heaven couldn't figure it out. There was no doubt that no matter what, the Celestial Emperor would never allow his successor to become a preacher of the Buddhist sect. His successor was also going to impart the Tao of the Fu clan, and not any other unorthodox Tao. In the heart of the Emperor of Heaven, all other Taos had to stand aside. Only the Tao of the Fu clan was the true Tao of heaven and earth. Buddhism was short-lived. Later on, the numerous temples and monasteries were imitations of those who didn't know the true meaning of Buddhism. They were just jokes. Tangjung is the real Buddhist. I have to make it clear to him that he must get out of this as soon as possible. He must not fall deeper and deeper. The Emperor of Heaven made up his mind. He looked at Tangjung's kasaya and wished he could take it off. However, this was a critical moment for Tangjung, and he could not be disturbed. Otherwise it would only do him more harm than good. Emperor of Heaven could only suppress the displeasure in his heart. Tangjung continued to immerse himself in the wondrous state. Buddhism emphasized enlightenment. This time, Tangjung had obtained Fushi's Tao insight, and he had a sudden epiphany. A good novel. He chanted the Ksitigarbha Sutra. This was a natural action. Even he himself did not realize the mystery behind it. With the kasaya on his body, this was a phenomenon that could only occur when one truly understood the essence of Buddhism. If the Dizang of Goguryeo saw this scene, he would definitely be overjoyed and chant the name of Buddha. For ordinary people, this was something that they could only dream of. However, Tangjung was lucky enough to obtain all of this. Perhaps this was fate. Buddhism emphasized fate, and Tangjung was also a person of fate. Not only was he fated with the so-called Tao of heaven and earth, but he was also deeply connected with Buddhism. Tangjung was completely unaware of all of this. He was just following his heart. In the Sumeru world, the Shura suddenly opened his eyes. There was a trace of golden light in his eyes. He had always been suppressed by the Ksitigarbha Sutra, but it was the Ksitigarbha Sutra that could increase his intelligence. This was something that caused him pain and joy. The Ksitigarbha Sutra sounded again. This time, the Shura did not show any signs of pain. Instead, he was quiet and peaceful, as if he was enjoying it very much. The Shura's spiritual intelligence had been awakened. He did not know why, but he could clearly feel that his spiritual intelligence was rapidly increasing. This abnormal phenomenon made him overjoyed. If it was in the past, he would have instinctively cheered. However, now that he had awakened his spiritual intelligence, he had become deep and even a little shrewd. Therefore, he showed a painful expression, which was no different from before. Tangjung's mind was completely immersed in other places. He did not notice the Shura's abnormality. Otherwise, it would definitely arouse his vigilance. In addition, there was another person living in another place in the Sumeru world, Xianin. Xianin was injured by the soul-searching technique and became a mentally disabled person. She was imprisoned in the Sumeru world and was almost forgotten by Tangjung. Last time, Tangjung kept chanting the Ksitigarbha Sutra in the Sumeru world. Over time, there was a subtle change in her body that no one knew. This time, the Ksitigarbha Sutra sounded again. A trace of wisdom appeared in her eyes, and the dull look in her eyes disappeared. She opened her eyes wide and looked around curiously. At first, she showed a suspicious look, not knowing where she was. Finally, she came to a realization and a mysterious smile gradually appeared on her mouth. The Ksitigarbha Sutra was recited loudly. Xianyin listened as if intoxicated. The light in her eyes became brighter and brighter. But in an instant, it disappeared, leaving only the restrained light of wisdom. Tang Zheng never thought that the Ksitigarbha Sutra would not only awaken the Shura's spiritual intelligence, but also make him smarter. Xianyin was also blessed by this, and her stupidity was cured. Xianyin regained her spiritual intelligence and understood what was going on. Her heart was also in awe. She was not as arrogant as before, and became cautious. She had already lost to Tang Zheng once. Although Tang Zheng did not kill her, that was by luck. If Tang Zheng found out that she had recovered, he would definitely not let her go. Perhaps, her life would come to an end. In order to survive, she must think of a foolproof plan. Tang Zheng, I have been unhindered, and countless people in history have been toyed with by me. In the end, I fell into your hands and became a fool. I will remember this enmity. Don't worry, one day, I will repay you double what you have done to me. Xianyin silently made up her mind, and an imperceptible cold light flashed in the depths of her eyes. My recovery must have something to do with this sound. Her attention was immediately attracted by the Ksitigarbha Sutra. This is not an ordinary technique. If I can understand the essence of it, it will be of great benefit. Even if I can't understand the essence, if I can find a flaw in it, when I fight Tang Zheng in the future, I can take him by surprise. Xianyin did not try to break through the shackles of the Sumeru world. She knew that Tang Zheng's cultivation increased rapidly. She did not know the current situation of Tang Zheng, so she did not dare to act rashly. She was afraid that she would expose herself and lose her chance. She became a fool again, but in her mind, she firmly remembered the Ksitigarbha Sutra and tried to figure out the profound principles of it. The Dizong of Goguryeo recited the Ksitigarbha Sutra to deliver all living beings from torment. Even the ghosts of the 18 layers of hell could be converted, so it was not difficult for humans. When Xianyin calmed her mind and tried to figure out the Ksitigarbha Sutra, her mind was brought to a mysterious state by the Ksitigarbha Sutra. The Ksitigarbha Sutra delivered all living beings from torment, and Xianyin was one of them. Naturally, she could not escape this rule. She did not know the situation, but was immersed in the mysterious state, unable to extricate herself. In the future, when Xianyin recalled her life, there was no doubt that this was the most crucial moment, and would completely change the trajectory of her life. Tang Zheng stopped reciting, and the cassock disappeared. The golden light dissipated, and the 9th main meridian was hidden in his body again. He opened his eyes, and everything was clearly displayed in front of him. Fushi's will did not directly affect him. His cultivation was still the same, and his skills did not become more profound. Suddenly, everything in his eyes changed subtly. If he did not try his best to catch this change, he would not be able to detect it. This change was that everything in his eyes was full of mystery, as if there was a kind of Tao operating in the unseen world. This kind of Tao was extremely mysterious, and it was impossible to catch. What's going on? He raised his eyebrows, revealing a suspicious expression. The Sky Emperor had been staring at him the entire time. When he saw the suspicious look on his face after waking up, he hurriedly asked, "Do you feel something different?" Of course there was a different feeling. Tang Zheng nodded subconsciously. The Emperor of Heaven said with a smile, "That's right, this is the essence of the ancestors' will. It has given you another unique perspective to see the world." Unique perspective? Tang Zheng was even more confused. The Emperor of Heaven did not hide anything, and explained with all his heart. The Emperor of Heaven comprehended the great Tao of heaven and earth. Everything in the world has its own Tao, and only the great Tao of heaven and earth is orthodox. You've obtained the inheritance of Tao insight, and Tao insight will appear in your eyes. Look at the grass, trees, flowers, and stones in your surroundings. They all have their own Tao, and the Tao operates in everything. Observe the Tao and comprehend the great Tao, This is the essence of the great Tao of heaven and earth. Tang Zheng seemed to understand, and pondered for a moment, yet did not really catch the essence of what was said. But one thing was certain, this was absolutely a good thing for him. No matter if it was the Tao of all things or the great Tao of heaven and earth, he just had to cultivate with all his heart. When the time came, success would naturally follow naturally, and there was no need to think so much. The others looked at Tang Zheng with burning gazes, and they could only feel envy. Judging from how Ji Wuxiang racked his brains, and didn't hesitate to chase after him from afar for the sake of seeing through the secrets of the heaven entrance, the so-called great Tao of heaven and earth was extremely tempting. But Ji Wuxiang racked his brains and returned in failure, and it benefited Tang Zheng instead. Besides feeling envy, the others weren't jealous. All the people present had deep relationships with Tang Zheng, so they were sincerely happy for him. Tang Zheng heaved a sigh of relief, and then he glanced deeply at Fuxi like a statue as he silently thanked Fuxi in his heart. The Emperor of Heaven looked at Tang Zheng with gratification, and instructed. The inheritance of the great Tao has been successfully passed down. Tang Zheng, from today onwards, you must cultivate diligently and not let down the kindness of the ancestors' inheritance. Understood. Next, we'll be talking about another important matter. Since you've inherited the ancestors' Tao insight, then you're a member of the Fu clan from today onwards. But you're not a member of the Fu clan, so only by becoming a member of the Fu clan would you be able to properly inherit this Tao insight. The Emperor of Heaven spoke without end, and he didn't give Tang Zheng the chance to think. Tang Zheng frowned as he suddenly had a bad premonition. Chapter 1241. These words were earth-shattering, shocking everyone to the point that they were dumbstruck. Like wooden puppets, they stood there in a daze. D7% CF%, D3% C4%, B8% F3. Tang Zheng's eyelids twitched a few times. Then, his eyes widened as he stared at the Emperor of Heaven. Seeing his serious expression, he really didn't seem to be joking. Only then did he know that the other party was serious. But are you kidding me? Is this how you sell your daughter? Although I'm very outstanding, you don't have to be in such a hurry to marry your daughter to me. No, you're asking me to marry into your family. What era is this? There's actually such a thing as marrying into your family. If Tang Zheng likes someone, he would marry her officially. How could he marry into her family? Wouldn't that be a joke? The Emperor of Heaven didn't give him a chance to think. He looked at him aggressively, as if forcing him to agree immediately. The Empyrean fairy was dazed for a moment. She immediately understood her father's thoughts. The inheritance of the ancestors' Tao couldn't be passed on to outsiders. So this was the only condition that Tang Zheng could fulfill. However, marriage was as important as life for a woman. Fuxi had never thought that she would marry someone else. She had lived for so many years and seen so many joys and sorrows. She had long since passed the age and state of mind of a little girl. The parents' orders and the matchmaker's words. The Emperor of Heaven didn't even ask for his daughter's permission. In his opinion, although he loved his daughter, he had to make the decision on such a major matter. He also believed in his judgment that Tang Zheng was the best choice. What he didn't give to his daughter before, he was going to give it all to her now. She opened her mouth and wanted to refuse, but when she saw her father's expression, she swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. She had lived in modern society for so long, but many ideas were deeply ingrained in her bones. She was still no different from the ancient people. This was the case regarding marriage. Feng Shishir and Yi Dingdang looked at each other in dismay. They had no idea how things had turned out this way. Before the two of them could recover from the joy of Tang Zheng's words, they were so shocked by his words that half of their souls dissipated. They were shocked. They looked left at Tang Zheng, right at the Emperor of Heaven, not knowing what to do. This was definitely enough bait. Very few people could resist this temptation. It was like reaching the heavens in a single step. No matter how big the other families in the world were, could they be compared to the Emperor of Heaven? Of course not. The Emperor of Heaven's identity was too prominent, so much so that their self-confidence was shaken. To read a book, please go to 520. They encouraged and comforted each other with their eyes, silently believing that Tang Zheng would not abandon them. This was a kind of absolute trust, mutual trust that could only be formed after going through trials and tribulations. Tang Zheng did not disappoint them. After being stunned for a moment, he immediately retorted and said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "Senior, marriage is an important matter. How can you treat it so lightly?" The Emperor of Heaven did not understand Tang Zheng's thoughts and said, "It is precisely because marriage is an important matter that it is decided by the parents and spoken by the matchmaker." Tang Zheng finally remembered that the other party had the mindset of an ancient person. He patiently explained, "My heart already belongs to someone else, so I can only accept your good intentions." "Your heart belongs to someone else?" The Emperor of Heaven frowned, clearly displeased. Feng Shishir and Yi Dingdang became nervous. They did not know when, but the two of them had tightly grasped each other's hands. At this moment, the two of them shared the same fate. "My Yaoer is so outstanding. Is there anyone else who can compare to her?" The Emperor of Heaven questioned. Tang Zheng was unmoved. He looked at the Empyrean fairy and said, "She is indeed an outstanding 1 in 10,000. Among the girls I have met, there is no one who is stronger than her. But when it comes to matters of the heart, it is important that both sides are in love. A melon that is forcefully picked is not sweet." The Emperor of Heaven automatically ignored the second half of Tang Zheng's words and casually said, "Since you also admit that she is outstanding, then all the more you should be together. There is no need for so many excuses. Moreover, it is normal for a man to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. If you take my Yaoer as your wife and take other people as your concubines, I am an open-minded parent and will not object. Take a wife and concubines." This word was like a bolt of lightning that struck everyone. This was a modern society, not an ancient society. How could there be such a custom? Yan Luyan looked at Tang Zheng with a smile that was not a smile. He thought to himself that if other people were to encounter such a good thing, they would have already eagerly agreed. 3 wives and 4 concubines. This was something that many men dreamed of. Tang Zheng was not an ordinary man. Naturally, he would not agree to such a ridiculous proposal. He had feelings for several girls, and it was not wrong to say that he was a romantic. On the contrary, he was not a pervert. He did not want to sleep with every woman he met. That was not a human, but an animal. The Empyrean fairy had a prominent status, and also had the Nining Saint body. However, he did not have feelings for the Empyrean fairy, so it was impossible for them to be together. This was the persistence and responsibility of a man. He was together with other people because he had true feelings for them, and was connected to their hearts. He was very good at distinguishing between the relationships. Tang Zheng did not know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at the endlessly pestering Emperor of Heaven. He did not expect the dignified Emperor of Heaven to be like this on this issue, which put him in a dilemma. He did not hesitate and said straightforwardly, "Senior, I still have to say the same thing. I appreciate your kindness." Seeing Tang Zheng refuse again and again, the Emperor of Heaven's expression gradually became cold. His gaze toward Tang Zheng became somewhat unfriendly. Tang Zheng straightened his chest without the slightest bit of fear or guilt as he faced the heavenly emperor. Their eyes met and invisible auras collided in the air. No one was willing to give in to the other. The Emperor of Heaven had never met someone with such a stubborn temper. If he had thrown out this condition to others, they would have already scrambled for it. Tang Zheng actually made all kinds of excuses. How preposterous. The Emperor of Heaven's heart was burning with anger. Everyone could feel his anger. The Empyrean fairy's heart was filled with a bitter taste, and even a trace of disappointment. She could not help but think of the scene when she saved Tang Zheng. Her lips pressed together, and a trace of ripples appeared in her heart. This kind of ripple had never appeared before. It made her feel a bit at a loss, a bit of resistance, and also a bit of liking. Hearing Tang Zheng refuse without hesitation, that trace of ripple came to an abrupt end. All kinds of feelings welled up in her heart. She looked deeply at Tang Zheng and said to the Emperor of Heaven, "Father, let's talk about this later." She actually understood Tang Zheng's character quite well. Especially when Tang Zheng interacted with other women, she could see him more clearly. He was a person who valued friendship and righteousness. He was not as emotional and cold as he appeared on the surface. If she continued to force him, it would instead be counterproductive. She wanted to persuade her father, but in front of so many people, saying this would only make her father lose face and would only make the situation worse. The Emperor of Heaven did not understand his daughter's painstaking efforts, and did not understand Tang Zheng's character. He insisted on his opinion and said, "There is no need to talk about later. We must talk about it now. Tang Zheng, you have already obtained the ancestors' Dao inheritance. This matter is not up to you." Tang Zheng raised his eyebrows and said, "Senior, you are twisting words and forcing logic. Why didn't you say it clearly before and only say it after the fact? Forgive me for not being able to comply. You must clearly think about what it means to refuse." The Emperor of Heaven was furious. Tang Zheng's expression did not change as he said, "I know. I do not regret it. Young man, you are still too young. Going against the Emperor of Heaven will not do you any good. Moreover, the Empyrean Fairy is of great use to you. She has the 9 Yin Saint body, and you have the 9 Yang Saint body. Don't you want to solve the problem of your 9 Yang Saint body? Marrying her will only bring you benefits and no harm." The inner demons suddenly persuaded. There was no doubt that the inner demon's words were completely reasonable in terms of benefits. However, Tang Zheng was not a person who only cared about benefits. If feelings could be exchanged for benefits, then what was the point of living? He was not a cold-blooded animal, so he naturally would not agree to this. "Thank you for your good intentions, but I will not compromise." Tang Zheng replied the inner demons. The inner demons chuckled. "What a stubborn temper. However, you are very similar to me in the past. I actually found myself liking you a little." In the past, who knew how many people from the inner demons had extended an olive branch to him, but he was alone in the world and did not bow to anyone. It was precisely because of this that many people saw him as a thorn in their side, and wanted to eliminate him from this world. However, the heart demon was too powerful, and those people did not succeed in the end. Instead, they were led by the nose by the heart demon, and they were left in a sorry state. Seeing that Tang Zheng was able to remain unyielding in the face of the inner demons felt a bit of admiration for him. Tang Zheng rolled his eyes and said, "Who is like you? We are not the same kind of people." "Is that so? I feel that if you continue like this, you will definitely become like me. You will become a thorn in the side of all the powers. When the time comes, you will be hunted down." "Ha ha ha." The inner demons mocked. "Do you think everyone is like you? I am not a loner like you. So what if I am hunted down? Why would I be afraid?" After a pause, Tang Zheng expressed his thoughts. "What is the point of cultivating if you can't do as you wish after cultivating your entire life? My goal is to not lower my head, to follow my heart, and to live a carefree life." "What a carefree life." The inner demons praised loudly. "If there is wine, I will definitely drink with you." The inner demon's praise came from the bottom of his heart. Tang Zheng could hear it and couldn't help but smile. However, his smile disappeared when he saw the Emperor of Heaven's gloomy expression. The Emperor of Heaven looked at this stubborn fellow. If it were anyone else, he would have long since attacked them with a storm. However, Tang Zheng's identity was not ordinary, and he had inherited Fuxi's will. This made him feel somewhat helpless. Their gazes met in midair, neither of them willing to lower their heads. The atmosphere was somewhat awkward and even a bit stifling. Yi Dingdang and Fang Shishir held each other's hands, their palms sweating. They were both gratified by Tang Zheng's decision, and lamented that they had not chosen the wrong person. However, they were also worried about Tang Zheng's risky choice. What if the Emperor of Heaven wanted to deal with Tang Zheng? He'd just obtained the Fuxi Dao insight, and hadn't even had the time to be happy when he'd encountered this problem. The ups and downs of life were truly like a roller coaster that shook one's soul and stimulated one's nerves. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.